my fellow Westorians. I'm Aziz, with me is Ashea, and this is Valar Rereadis. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will feature a guest or guests. We'll take a closer look at each chapter, going through them one by one instead of in batches. A standard warning must apply as well. These chapters are subject to change by the time we see them in their final form. Today's guest is a good friend of ours. We have worked together on topics like the Red Keep, on topics like the Great Empire, the Dawn, on topics like, let's say, magical diseases, and we've also worked together on a few adult beverages on a patio or three. Welcome, Robert, aka InDeepGeek. How you doing, my friend?
I am doing really well. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute treat being here, I have to say. And your title sequence is very impressive too, I have to say. Nearly as impressive as your beard, which I was admiring earlier.
Well, I thought I'd go as damp hair as I could for this one. So, trying to pull off the look. I'm not quite as grizzled, but, we do what we can. I'm not truly Ironborn, so,
I could go dump some water on your head, Aziz, and you'll really be damp water. Hair. Salt water? Yeah.
I think
the chat would appreciate it.
My microphone and headphones probably wouldn't, but everything else would be good. So also I want to make sure people are aware that each episode of History of Westeros Valar Rereadis is supported by goodqueenally.tumblr.com. Nina's thoughts are present in every episode. You should check out her blog for additional excellent writings. Same goes for Joe Buckley and Emily of the Eyrie. Their show, The Isle of Faces, is an excellent companion to Valar Rereadis and is excellent in its own right. Check them out, the Scraps and Scrolls edition for Valar Rereadis. And, of course, stay with them for their Scraps and Screens edition starting somewhat soon, where they will be rewatching Game of Thrones from the beginning. Pretty cool. You may notice, if you're watching live or catching the video in some form or another, that I've got a History of Westeros shirt on. Ashea, what's the deal with these?
If you go to historyofwesteros.threadless.com, that's THREAD less.com, you can find two different designs of shirts. You can get them right there until we don't have a code anymore.
We don't have a code. We'll probably have one again eventually. So, but for now, they're just new, they're cool, and we'll be adding to it as we move forward. I actually had one on last week, and we just completely forgot to mention it. It's like we're all ready with the first time we had shirts, and I didn't say a thing. But hey, better late than never. If you have live questions, you can certainly feel free to submit them. If you have questions that you want to ask in advance of an episode of Valar Rereadis, also feel free to do so. You can submit them through one of our social media platforms like Facebook or Flick or Slack or Discord. You can also email us at westeroshistory@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at westeroshistory. Each episode of Valar Rereadis for the Winds of Winter will also start with a brief history of the chapter itself. We've got a few extra things to say about this one because, well, we were somewhat part of the history of this chapter, not directly, but hey, we had fun. We were some of the first people ever to hear this chapter. It was the final one of the 11 chapters that have been released in advance of the book. It's the most recent, the last one. We don't expect to see another one. Balticon 2016, the last Saturday of May, which, if you're on top of things, you may realize that yesterday, as of this recording, was also the last Saturday of May. So, no joke, my friends, 5 years ago yesterday, this chapter came out. So we are like right on the anniversary of this one. So that's pretty cool. Even cooler, myself and Ash and Nina were there for the reading. We were at Balticon. We were among the group that heard this chapter for the first time ever. Jim McGeehan, who was a recent guest, was sitting next to me, or right next to me, 2 seats away. Jeff Hartline, a.k.a. Brendan Beefish, was behind me. So we had a whole big group of friends there. It was really fun. Shad, you have some fond memories of that moment?
Yes, I was on the other side of the room.
Yeah, we weren't sitting next to each other.
We weren't sitting together. Separated. I was sitting with some other friends, and it was a grand time for us. I don't think people know those friends. Actually, I think I was by Eliana.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think I was sitting next to her now that I think about it.
Okay,
so
cool.
That was nice.
Yeah, and yeah, it was as neat as Nina points out. We got a choice. Like George actually offered us a choice. He said, "Do you want Mercy?" And Mercy had been read already. We knew Mercy, so people were like, okay, you know, we don't. That was better than nothing, but we know that one already." And he mentioned the Sons of the Dragon reading, which was at the time hadn't been published, so that was pretty cool. But then Damp Hair. And we were like, what? Nina remembers me saying, we get choices? And he told us we were all sick. He, you know, used stronger language than that, but he was laughing as he said it because he told us this chapter was messed up. And I assume you would agree with that. Robert, what about you? What was your first experience with this chapter? When did you get a hold of it? And I believe you told me it was your favorite. What makes it your favorite?
It is. Well, it's my favorite of the pre-release chapters that we have. And I wish I had a really cool story. It makes me feel very jealous. I don't. It was just one of those things where I think it was after I'd read through the books the second time, and I was just really getting into them, and then suddenly I saw somewhere as like a pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter. It's like, what? Where? And hunted it down and found it, and it was. It was the thing which struck me then, and it still strikes me now, is that this is the moment when I just took a step back and went, "Whoa, Euron's for real, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's not just like some little sideshow here. He's actually gonna do something massive." And it had to be a read it at least twice to actually take in everything that's there. It feels so much more dense. I love lots of these pre-release chapters. The Mercy one's great, the Theon one's great, but this has got so much packed into it. It's just I think this was just about a little bit before I launched my channel actually. So maybe this was played its own small part in me venturing towards that.
That's great. Well, that's just another thing to be excited about for this chapter, that it may have helped the InDeepGeek channel get launched. Just some small bit there. That's really cool. I didn't know that. So this chapter, like a lot of the others from the Winds of Winter that have been pre-released, were actually planned for A Dance with Dragons, but then moved. This one is no exception. Aeron joins Arianne, Elaine, Arya. Wait, it's all the A names. He hates the A name. No, he likes them. He just wanted to give them more space for their own thing. Now, as a lot of you all know already, we've covered some of these chapters already in various forms or another. This is the only one we actually did a scripted episode on. And we also did a full episode on E.U.R.O.N himself. But the episode on the Forsaken was made about 3 months after the chapter dropped. And the E.U.R.O.N episode was about 8 months after that. So a lot of things have changed since then. Some of the ideas we had back then still stand. The detail gathering remains kind of our anchor for continued discussions. But let's review what's changed since then. And I won't do too much of what we've discussed in the prior episodes. There'll be a small amount of rehashing. Mostly we have new things to bring up. A lot of fresh takes, in part because of a reread that we just did. And of course, there's just been so much time to think about it. The Song of Ice and Fire history, we've had time to think about where these parallels have landed. And of course, Fire and Blood was added to the mix. That helped. But probably the biggest change is the TV show. The day after we heard this chapter, in fact, Balticon set up a room for people to watch Game of Thrones. It was during season 6. It was episode 6, season 6, Blood of My Blood. That's the one where Sam and Gilly go to Hornhill and Bran and Mira flee the Whites just after Hold the Door. Hold the Door was the week before. And it's the one where Aerys is yelling, burn them all, and Bran has visions of that. Which is a nice coincidence, too, because Hold the Door is the episode that has the Bloody Hand theater production, which is the one we just discussed last week with Mercy. But circling back to the Forsaken, E.U.R.O.N had only been introduced to TV audiences a few episodes prior to all that. So we really didn't know what TV E.U.R.O.N was going to be like yet at that point. So we had nothing, we couldn't really take any of that into account. And of course, as you know, I don't really need to say this, but I will anyway. HBO's E.U.R.O.N is not book E.U.R.O.N. Get Pilo Asbic out of your mind. He was able to pull off the mad look. You know, he had crazy face or what have you, but he didn't have blue lips or the mismatched eyes or any of the supernatural stuff. And that's a lot of stuff, right? The supernatural stuff is a lot. So Pilo seems like a cool guy, a good actor, but even he, who has read the book, says book E.U.R.O.N and show E.U.R.O.N, not very similar. He agrees. So, yeah. Book E.U.R.O.N was about as present in the show as book Victarion. And well, there is no Victarion on the show. And there was that moment where Euron is swinging around his axe like a madman, the first one to jump on. That was kind of like Victarion, but anyway. On the other hand, Night King on TV, you may have noticed if you were aware of Euron theories, the ones that were out, a lot of them that came out after this particular chapter, a lot of the things that people predict for Euron in the books, Night King did in the show. So it's really hard to not consider this connection and realize that probably what the show did was take a lot of that Euron stuff and give it to Night King. Just a few examples. Silence. He wants to annihilate like all humanity, right? They're just the silence of winter. The destruction of knowledge is a really big one. Bran had that scene where Bran talks about how the Night King wants to kill him to destroy all the stored knowledge that humanity has gathered. Plus the gruesome rituals, the stealing of a dragon, and the biggest of all, bringing down the wall, right? That's a huge thing Night King did that a lot of people think Euron will do. So this also fits with the pre-existing theory that suggests Euron was considered but rejected as a green seer when he was young. If Bran, a green seer, is meant to save the world, and they were searching for him, this could be a monstrously tragic irony if they unleashed Euron and then in an effort to save the world, and he's the thing that the world needs to be saved from. So it's possible that experience of being rejected, being considered for this magical role, but then not given it, was what changed Euron forever. I'm not sure if Euron was empowered, but it's certainly one of the things we're going to talk about. So other brief similarities: Night King, 2 blue eyes. Euron just 1. His other is black. Euron actually has bluer lips than the Night King. Euron wears a crown of shark's teeth that we see for the first time in this chapter. Night King has his own crown made of bone. So there's a lot that's changed, as you can see, a lot to dig into. It's going to be a lot of fun. So Robert, just to start off kind of as an overview, has the show changed your view on Euron, looking at this Night King stuff, or just in general, how have you viewed this chapter since so much time has passed? If people watching didn't see that, we just had a cat just completely charge across my keyboard here. So anyway, that's done with. Back to the question, Robert. Oh, is he frozen?
Hello?
Oh, there he is. Okay.
And that was my internet. Was the question about how the show affected my view of Euron?
Indeed, yes.
Well, I mean, I think you covered a lot of the big ones for me. The Night King, absolutely, I agree that they took a lot thematically, at the very least, of what was intended for Euron in there. One thing I would add is the Cersei thing.
Ooh, yeah.
Now, this is something, and maybe we can get into this a little bit later, but just trying to work through the logic of what is going to be happening in the Winds of Winter. It does throw Cersei and Euron together in a way that I'd not really thought about until the show happened. And then suddenly they got this alliance, and it was like, well, that's a little bit strange. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
But now I'm really quite on board with this idea of Euron and Cersei. I think thematically it works hugely well. The links across with Qyburn as well, I'd quite like to unpick that a bit later too.
Good call, yeah.
So I think that that's the thing for me that made me change my mind slightly about what might happen in the book, was the fact that I think book 7, this is going to be a major force in what's going on, the Euron Cersei link.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. We do have plans to talk about Euron Cersei. We'll get into greater detail on the possibilities, and to tease that a little more, there's certainly things in Fire and Blood that made us think of this. There's certainly evidence of historical parallels that fit pretty well with the notion of a Euron Cersei alliance. For example, the concept of a queen in the West, aka Rhaena Targaryen. So that was really neat as a possibility. I agree with you that Cersei is a big part of this, and also, so it's kind of ironic, isn't it? It's not what Euron did on the show, because what your book show Euron,
Yeah.
He's not it's not him. It's what the other characters did around him and the parts that associate with him. So that's kind of indirect, but
yeah. I was just going to jump in and say Fire and Blood, because you mention it. That also, for me, the big imagery there that we kind of knew this already, but that Aemond One Eye, E.U.R.O.N One Eye, fighting on dragons over the God's Eye. I love this idea. We'll get back, I'm sure, to E.U.R.O.N and dragons in a moment, but this kind of thematically works so well, as this is the heart of this story around that geographical area of the God's Eye Lake, the Isle of Faces, Harrenhal, the Inn at the Crossroads. That is the geographical focus of this story, and I think that we've got now a little bit of foreshadowing that George R. R. Martin loves doing, historical things that we're going to get an echo of again. One-eyed person on a dragon fighting somebody else on a dragon. I think that may well happen.
It's a bullseye, right? I mean, and it's the one blue eye that they both have too, which is really, and that of course as a thematic connection to the others with their blue eyes, the starry blue eyes, the sapphire like Aemon has. Yeah, you nailed it. That is a really perfect part of this pastiche of predictions for Euron that really didn't exist back when The Forsaken first came out, because it wasn't balanced against what we saw from TV and Fire and Blood. So as you can see already, lots of new ideas, folks, lots of things we're going to talk about. Starting off here, we've got our brief synopsis, but also a super chat from Sweet Milicia. Says, no question today, just love for History of Westeros and InDeepGeek, two of the first A Song of Ice and Fire content creators I found, and helped me fall headfirst down the rabbit hole that is this wonderful fandom. Well, we appreciate that, Sweet Milicia. We're glad you found us, and we're glad we can keep the content coming. Speaking of, Robert, I neglected to ask at the beginning, what have you been doing lately over on InDeepGeek channel?
Well, as you'll know, being an avid follower of InDeepGeek channel,
it's more of a rhetorical question.
I'm aware. I'm just teasing, Aziz. I'm just teasing. And I should probably say, I didn't say at the very beginning, Aziz and Ashaya as well, some of my favourite people in this community, absolute stalwarts, and it is a complete honour being here. This is a channel that I hold and a podcast that I hold in extremely high regard. But what have I been doing on mine? No, absolute pleasure. What have I been doing on my channel? Well, I'm expanding out from just A Song of Ice and Fire into the Lord of the Rings as well. I've got a few other things sort of that I'm going to be doing too, but the Lord of the Rings, for those who don't know, there will be a huge budget. We're talking like billions budget for Amazon have bought the rights for doing a Lord of the Rings TV show. It's not a remake of the films. That's not what this is about. This is effectively a prequel, and they are filming it at the moment. And so we're kind of building up to that, and I'm obviously working through the book stuff as well, and some of the background to that we have in the Silmarillion and the other books that Tolkien's got there in the Legendarium. So if you're interested in the Lord of the Rings, then do sort of go and check that out. On A Song of Ice and Fire, though, my possibly nerdiest proto video series that I've ever done, I followed up what was Aragorn's tax policy with what was Joffrey's tax policy. So if you're interested in that, this is a couple of areas of interest: nerdy books and TV shows crossed with public policy. I love them both. So if you're interested in what Joffrey's tax policy is, then I've got a video on that out today.
That is fantastic. Yeah, and of course, you also have your Well Told Tale channel. That's still coming along nicely, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's also a podcast inspired by you. Nice. This is a podcast as well as a YouTube channel. This is a passion of mine, is the classics of science fiction and fantasy. We're reading the things now that are influenced by the absolute foundational stories that we have in these genres. So we're talking about things like The War of the Worlds, Frankenstein, nice. Call of Cthulhu, all of these absolutely wonderful stories. And I'm audio narrating them, and that's all it is. There's no bells and whistles about it. It's just me reading you a story. If you'd like that, the Well Told Tale is where to go.
Yeah, that is, I mean, you hear the man's voice. What are you waiting for? Like, I'm going to have to check out your Call of Cthulhu. I don't think I knew you did that one, and that is one of my favorite stories of all time.
3 or 4 Lovecraft ones. They're a big hit. People like them.
Okay, well, I'll check out all of those. Yeah, but I will not listen to those as I'm trying to fall asleep. That's something for during the day with sunlight around. Yes, no Lovecraft in the darkness. That's rule number 1.
No, and apparently my voice does often send people to sleep, which I'm taking as a compliment. So I'm not a problem with it, but apparently many people do say that they fall asleep to me on a regular basis, which I'll take as a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing. Yeah. Brand Winslow sends a Trooper chat and says, "Happy Valar Rereadis Sunday, everyone. So happy to be here live for one of my favorite guests in this TWOW series. Robert is also the best." Right on. Thank you, Brand Winslow. Hope it's going well for you down
Thanks, Brandon.
in Puerto Rico. Right, let's hit the synopsis. The first line is, "It was always midnight in the belly of the beast." Aeron Dampere has been living in a series of dungeons and the hold of the Silence these last several months, at least 2 months, given the progression of poor Phalia Flowers' pregnancy, but perhaps more than that even. Aeron doesn't know for sure. How could he? And since he's our POV, neither do we. It's a timeless sense we're thrust into here. We get some brief explanation of where Aeron is, how brutal his torment is, very, and then E.U.R.O.N shows up and it's off to the drug trip via Shade of the Evening. The visions are horrible, and while some of what he sees could be the product of his subconscious, some of it almost certainly has to be predictive. We've seen people tortured before. Heck, we've seen a Greyjoy tortured before. This somehow seems worse, though. E.U.R.O.N seems more formidable than Ramsay by quite a bit, but there are definitely some comparisons to be made. Ramsay broke Theon and made him reek, while E.U.R.O.N seeks to make his brother turn from the drowned god to worship him. E.U.R.O.N Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye, seeks godhood itself, it seems. To accomplish this, he has gathered a host of artifacts and priests and presumably quite a few secrets we've yet to see unleashed, though the dreams Aeron is forced to experience definitely give us some clues, some pretty strong clues. But we're still in the dark, like Aeron has been. What Ramsay did to Theon, E.U.R.O.N wants to do to the world. He told his fellow Ironborn that's what he'd give them, the world. But he didn't exactly share this part. He didn't tell them it would involve destruction on a scale perhaps not seen since the last long night, according to these Shade of the Evening visions anyway. He kept that and quite a few other secrets from his countrymen, such as this. No one knows what's happened to Aeron Greyjoy. Only Christopher Botley came close to guessing the truth. And why not? This chapter makes clear that E.U.R.O.N is a kinslayer. A man who would betray his family would surely not scruple to betray his country or just about anyone else. Though E.U.R.O.N goes a step further, he would even betray his god. Or all the gods, actually. But let's return to the lesson of Aeron's nephew, who recovered at least somewhat from his torment and regained enough of himself to be Theon again and to turn on the one who tormented him. Ultimately, Ramsay failed to break Theon. Likewise, Aeron's faith was not broken by his brother despite so many unimaginable horrors. If anything, Aeron's faith is even stronger, even as he's tied to the prow of the Silence, even as he's joined by poor Phalia Flowers to witness whatever comes next in this dark but quite compelling plotline. So that's the Forsaken, known as by us, the god of it can always get worse, aka, Ashaya, please tell us about your renaming of this chapter so nicely.
Yes, the E.U.R.O.N system, a la the Dennis system in Always Sunny. We have E, eliminate brothers. U, usurp the gods. R, release the Kraken. O, obtain a dragon. And finally, N, narrate this like an evil villain.
It's quite on point because in this episode of It's Always Sunny, they're making fun of dating systems and how they're breaking it down to distilling it to its essence, which is abusing women and manipulating women, which is what E.U.R.O.N is doing, but on a much larger scale and with supernatural tools instead of just a selfish sex drive or something like that. But anyway.
Yeah, it's all about how you break someone down and build them back up a little bit to use them and then just break them down again.
Yeah, it is quite on point. Even though that's a comedy and this is quite horrific, it's the same gist of just abuse to gain power over people and doing it really expertly, which makes it so awful. I mean, it's awful that because we keep getting in these spots where we feel bad for people that we previously strongly disliked. I mean, Aeron is a pretty bad dude, but through all his suffering, this moment of humanity at the end for Phalia and just not believing that this is just, like, you can probably write down a list of things that Aeron deserves and call it justice. But this, I don't think many people would call this justice. And it's peak perspective shift from George, and that's really saying something because we've experienced sympathy for the devil in the series already, right? Like Theon or the Hound or Jaime, Cersei, Tyrion. All these characters have done pretty awful things, and I won't speak for everyone else on how they feel about them, but I imagine that there's a lot of mixed feelings on a lot of these characters, and now Aeron's there too. And isn't that a bit of a pattern? Isn't that neat, Robert? It's mostly Greyjoys and Lannisters, and like, in the Hound is someone who worked for the Lannisters. People, these are the biggest share of characters that we start off kind of not being so into, but we get put in these situations where we don't necessarily like them any more than we did, but we end up feeling some sympathy for them because this level of suffering is just more than anyone deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what George R.R. Martin has done, and I'm currently rereading the series myself, or re-listening to it. It's the first time I've listened to it.
That's a fun experience.
And what one of the many things which has struck me is quite how stark focused book one is.
Yeah.
If you just think about the POV chapters, and it's like 75% stark sympathetic. It's like all bar Rob and Rickon of the Stark kids have got their own POV chapters. We have Catelyn, we have Ned, John. It's very rare that we dip out to yes, Tyrion and Dany, obviously, but most of the time we're just seeing it from their perspective. And so for a lot of these characters, it's when we actually start seeing things from their side that we start to go, okay, now I understand it. And it's really good writing because it's something George R.R. Martin, I'm sure he wants us to go through this mental process of thinking, I've only ever seen what that person did from the outside, but when I'm actually walking in their boots, when I actually see how or feel what they're feeling, it becomes a lot realer. With Aeron, then yeah, absolutely, he comes across. Yes, we've had a couple of chapters from him already, but he comes across quite bad. Here, you still see him as a bit of a religious fanatic. It has to be said, but you have to say that what's happening to him, there's a worse person that is dealing with this, and so you cannot help but feel for him through this process. It's great writing.
Yeah, right. And it's a theme that we've been pursuing all the way through. You've probably noticed it to some degree, and it just gets stronger all the way through. There's this sense that George builds that it can always get worse. There's like you go from Joffrey to Ramsay to Euron. You go from civil wars to bigger civil wars to people doing to things like the Red Wedding to just you name it. And now we have the winter, and we have all these things that sound like it's going to get worse. Onset of cannibalism, the grayscale. I mean, but Euron somehow seems worse than all those things, quite possibly, especially because he may enable some of them or push them along or help them or give them more free reign to do evil. And
yeah, absolutely. And the one thing just on that POV thing, we do not get Euron POV. And I don't think we will. And this adds to his kind of mystique. This adds to the fact that we're scared of him because we do not understand him. We've never got inside his mind. And again, this is surely deliberate on George R.R. Martin's part. He is showing us through the eyes of people around him, not what he is thinking himself. And that scares us because we do not know what he's capable of. All these other characters, we know what they're capable of. Cersei, we now know what she's capable of. So we're not as scared of her. But Euron is going to always be this this other, and I use that quite deliberately, obviously, this other. We do not know what he's about. We do not understand him. We can't get inside him.
Yeah, he has the like Cersei lacks creativity. That's one of her things, is she's not as imaginative with her cruelty, and same with Ramsay, which is they use sort of tried and true methods of brutality and control, whereas Euron is an innovator with control and subjugation and corruption, and he does it differently. He doesn't care about wealth. Wealth to him is just a means to do all these other things, and I think of Han Solo and Leia, and he says, I can imagine quite a lot. And you think about what E.U.R.O.N's capable of, and you think, yeah, I can imagine quite a lot. But then this chapter comes along, it's like, I didn't imagine anything like this.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Exactly.
whoa. What else is there? Like, what else is he going to do? Like, I feel like this is just the start, right? I mean, ooh.
It should be, from what he's saying. I mean, if his stated ambition is to become a god, whatever that means, that being a god is not having a battle off the south coast of Westeros. There's a lot more to it than just that. So yes, there are bigger things that are going to be happening here.
That's very exciting. Yeah. So let's get into some of that. Let's start off with a little bit of a meta comparison. That first line, it was always midnight in the belly of the beast. It's almost like he's Jonah inside the whale, which is probably a tougher experience than the Bible suggests. I mean, it probably stank in there. But Jonah got out of it alive. He accepted God's commands and turned towards his faith instead of away from it, which is part of why he ended up in the whale, because he turned away from God and God, caught up to him. Aeron, too, gets out of this alive, though I would not bet on his long-term survival. He, too, finds himself in a horrible and surreal situation, and his faith is crucial to his survival as well. But unlike Jonah, he does not relent. He does not change his ways. And so while Jonah is set free to begin preaching prophecy to Nineveh and the people who live there, Aeron refuses to be a priest of E.U.R.O.N, and thus his suffering only intensifies. Now, to be fair, this is God versus E.U.R.O.N we're talking about, so it's not the most apt comparison in that sense, but other parts of this comparison work very well. Now, the story of Jonah and the giant fish or whale, depending on the version of the story you've heard, is also relevant in other ways. In that story, God orders Jonah to go to Nineveh and preach, but instead, Jonah runs off and tries to sail away. God sends a storm, and Jonah admits the storm is his fault to the other sailors. He says, if you throw me overboard, the storm will stop. Now, we've heard sentiment like this from the Ironborn, because humans sacrifice to control the weather. We've seen that recently. And of course, God calling himself a storm is familiar to what E.U.R.O.N has said as well, comparing himself to a storm. So many people see the story of Jonah as an example of God's forgiveness, that he will accept you if you repent. E.U.R.O.N is kind of taking on that role too. He says, hey, Aeron, I'll let you out of this torment if you become my priest. But of course, Aeron's not doing that. And then the other key similarity too is Jonah has to accept God as the only God. He has to say all these other deities are false. E.U.R.O.N's pretty much saying the same thing here. He's like, all the other gods are lies, especially the one you worship. I'm the only one on the block now. And Jonah accepts this and is forgiven. But I guess if he hadn't, it might have been kind of bad, but we don't know what happened there. Back to here, by the end of this chapter, Aeron has not given up his old beliefs. I think this is a hugely important core aspect of the story, and perhaps foreshadowing that even with all his imagination, even in terms of inventing these awful sufferings throughout all this pain, throughout the epic plot implications and the supernatural terror, the way Aeron holds on to his faith is as meaningful and powerful as anything else in this whale of a chapter. It's a testament, pun intended, to how well George is able to keep this story focused on people and conflict and human stories, even when there's all these magic and drugs and torture and battles about to happen and all these other things distracting us. I suppose we could also say the silence is functioning a bit like the Ark. So another, not just Jonah, but we have Noah. Instead of saving animals from a great flood, he's trying to help cause some great destruction. It's not a flood, but great winter, great flood. It's vaguely familiar. Instead of pairs of animals of all kinds, he's got priests. And instead of trying to save them from extinction, he's driving them towards it. So a lot of inversions there. Glenn Thrasher sent a super chat, says, thank you. What do you have any comments on these biblical connections here? Is this stuff you've maybe thought about before, or is it just kind of a fun little thing to look at?
I mean, I think it's a fun thing to look at. I think you're right. It's almost like an inversion. I mean, that first line about being in the belly of the beast does give this impression of this isn't just like on a boat or in a dungeon or something like that. This is something more real, something more living that he's going through. The Jonah thing, I get it. I think though that George R. R. Martin is very much, as he's inverting it, in that Aeron is not going to be thrown into the waters.
Right.
It's quite the opposite. He's been strapped in. He's not allowed to go into the waters. And George R. R. Martin has, as I understand it, confirmed we're going to get at least one more chapter from him. So he will survive. This isn't a matter of him being thrown into the waters as a sacrifice. The others may well be sacrifices, but he is not. He is going to survive. That is not what E.U.R.O.N wants from him. And I think that's an important point we have to take here, which I think we can build on it a little bit, is that we think of this as being strapped to the front of the boats. And I held this thought for a long time myself. They're all being sacrifices. But Aeron is not going to die in this chapter, as far as we understand.
That's a wrinkle, yeah.
Yeah, so the others may well, but that is not E.U.R.O.N's end game. And I think we need to, and this is something I personally want to come back to. This is a chapter. This is not the whole arc we've got here of Aeron and his faith. And yes, in this chapter, his faith is strong. And yes, in this chapter, E.U.R.O.N is ostensibly trying to break down his faith. But this is not the end. This is in the book. This is just the first bit of his arc.
That's true.
So I think we need to understand it within that context. It's the same for all the pre-release chapters, is that it's not, because we've had them for so long, just these chapters, we view them just as they are.
That's a good point.
But this is just the first of what's going to be happening to E.U.R.O.N and Aeron in this book.
That's an important flag to plant throughout all this. It's very good that you said that, and I agree. For all we know, E.U.R.O.N will just like, screw you, drowned god. You know, like the first line of the next chapter will be him like, forget this. Noga F adds, the other half of the Jonah story is Jonah learning to have compassion and appreciating the mercy of cold justice. So you can see it relating to that. Yeah, that's certainly the theme that could arise from this in one way or another. Certainly something we've already talked about is how we see these characters that we grow to dislike. Even if we see things from their perspective, we may still dislike them, but then we see them suffer like this and say, this isn't justice. That's it really tests our instincts on biblical phrases like eye for an eye. Like that's eye for an eye isn't really how we tend to view justice these days. But in a setting like this, it's maybe a little more accepted, but as modern readers, we don't have to look at it that way. we can make our own judgments. Let's talk about the wine of the warlocks. Would you like to read this quote here, Robert?
I would love to read this quote. So this is from when Aeron is being made to drink the wine of the warlocks. It was thick and viscous, with a taste that seemed to change with every swallow. Now bitter, now sour, now sweet. When Aeron tried to spit it out, his brother tightened his grip and forced more down his throat. That's it, priest, gulp it down. The wine of the warlocks, sweeter than your seawater, with more truth in it than all the gods of earth.
It's an odd line. We'll talk about that in a minute, gods of earth. But this continues immediately after when E.U.R.O.N asks what awaits him below the sea, and Aeron answers as you'd expect. He's like, well, the drowned god's watery halls are beneath the sea. And E.U.R.O.N's like, nope, that's fake. That's all fake. And so Aeron believes that his brother will be waiting for him. The brother, E.U.R.O.N, who is extremely important to his psyche. He's very sad about E.U.R.O.N. He's traumatized about his early death and partially blames himself because, of course, it was an infection that he got from playing the finger dance with Aeron. But of course, there's also guilt. And this is what E.U.R.O.N, one of the many things E.U.R.O.N plays on that shows both just how evil he is, but also how smart he is. Because he's really good at manipulation. He says, he plays on that guilt. He enables it, says, look, yeah, you prayed that I wouldn't torture you. You prayed that you would torture him instead. So it's like adding to his guilt, saying you prayed that I would abuse him instead of you. Rather than you taking it on, you prayed that I would do it. It's like he's already building up to the fact, look, you've already prayed to me in the past. You've already seen me as a god in a sense before this. What's a little more? And he says the drowned god is a fiction. It's an invention of man. There's no E.U.R.O.N. There's nothing. All this you've been building your life around is nonsense. And the unspoken sentiment there, I suppose, is, well, if man can invent gods, why not him? Right? He's got the ambition, the skill. Is that sort of how you see it? It's kind of a maybe it boils down to semantics. At first I wanted to ask this question later, but actually I think it makes sense to ask it here. Do you think Euron believes the gods exist and that they're weak? Or do you think that when he says the gods are lies, that he means it literally? Because when he says the gods are lies, he could be saying like what we believe about them is not true. Like they're a lot weaker. That's the lie. Or it could be the lie is they aren't real at all. Where do you fall on that sort of spectrum of possibilities for him? Not like what you believe, but what do you think he believes?
Well, I think he believes that there are a couple of options. Either the gods don't exist, or they do exist and they don't do anything. And I think that as far as he's concerned, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it
amounts to the same thing.
The end
right?
result is the same. Exactly. The end result is the same thing. He can do stuff and the gods don't do anything back. And for me, I think this is actually, I mean, it's quite meta, but this is something that George R. Martin's done a couple of times, which is given one of the most obnoxious characters in the story an insight into how the world works. It's the same with Qyburn gets this insight into how sort of life after death works, and it's like something lingers. He has that great story that he tells, and he is sort of proven right. He does all his experiments and he creates Zombie Mountain, and he seems to have understood something fundamental about how that universe works. And E.U.R.O.N. similarly seems to have understood something about how this universe works, that the gods are not going to interact with us. And that's something George R. R. Martin has said. He said, we're not going to see the gods in this story. Yeah. So E.U.R.O.N's right. I mean, we might hate him for it. We might hate everything he does around it, but he's right. He can go and like thumb his nose at every god. They're not going to appear in this story. They're never going to come up and squash him. He's right.
Yeah.
And so that I think is a fundamental point we've got here, and part of why he can be successful in inverted commas, because he understands something that lots of other people simply do not.
He's found a weakness in the system, a market flaw, and he's exploiting it. Yeah, that's a really, really good way to put it. It's a cultural weakness that he's exploiting. He's like, everyone believes this thing that's just clearly not true. and you're right that he's sensed that, he's sussed that out. And you're right, there's a lot of examples of it. Like all this time Bran spends learning about magic and the children of the forest, they don't bring up kinslaying. They're like, that never comes up. They're like, yeah, we don't care about that. I mean, they don't say it, they don't care about it, but it never. You would think that maybe it would come up, or they're like, yeah, we actually do care about that. It never seems like it would have mattered to them. Like, why would the old gods care about such things? So intuitively, you can kind of see where he's coming from, but then he unleashes all this detail of how he's proved it to himself, and it almost works on Aeron too. He's like, wow, you really did those things, and he believes him, and we believe him that he killed Balon, that he kills Robin and E.U.R.O.N. Well, he doesn't kill E.U.R.O.N, but he kills the other Harlan. There's so many brothers that have been killed.
There are.
Yeah. So that's a really like shocking way to say, look, I killed them and nothing happened. I did it more than once. Like it was like I tried it several times just to be sure, and nope, nothing. And this is not just is this like a brutal surprise to drop on his brother, to shatter some of his preconceived notions about how the world works, but it also just is another thing where he's just claiming ownership over Aeron, saying, look, all this pain and suffering surrounding our family, I caused that. I like in kind of in the same way that gods are responsible for what we do or don't feel in terms of suffering from the outside, like they change the weather, or they bring famine, they bring, they're in charge. Euron's like, no, I've been in charge. All those things that you've ascribed to the workings of the gods, that was me. So that's, like you said, it's very smart. Like the methods he uses to manipulate are so peak evil, but you cannot deny the intelligence that worked behind them.
Absolutely. He is clever. And George R. R. Martin, this is something, a lesson we can learn for our own world as well. George R. R. Martin is very clear. you can be clever and evil, and you can admire the cleverness of somebody at the same time as saying fundamentally they're doing bad things. And that is something that is, as I say, it's true for our world as well, is that if all evil people were stupid, then we'd be fine.
Yes.
The fact is that some evil people are very, very clever, and he's giving us some examples of this. E.U.R.O.N is one of them. He's very, very clever. He's planning ahead 2 or 3 books most of the time, and Qyburn is very clever. George R. R. Martin wants us to see clever bad people.
And we started off with some who weren't necessarily so clever. Joffrey was very unclever. Ramsay is cleverer than Joffrey, but outside of certain arenas, he's very unclever. Like he's pretty clever with torture stuff, and he was clever with the disguise and some of this deception, but other things he's quite not unclever about. But here we go with Euron, and he's just masters all these things. I think that your reference to Qyburn is a really good call there. I sometimes forget to think about him in this light, but you're right. That's a perfect example. And so this phrase, the last line of that, all the gods of earth, more truth than all the gods of earth. I wonder if that's just part of his sort of smarmy attitude about how fake the gods are, but it's still it's another way to sort of vaguely, subtly connect him to the old gods magic, which we know that's just part of him in some vague way. Like his visions more on the side of fire and destruction, but you can see he doesn't mention winter directly, but all the trappings are there. And of course the show gave us some more of that. But do you have any thoughts on that? It just seems like an odd line to me. All the gods of earth.
All the gods of earth.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is just him using language to make his point in a more subconscious way. Again, it's a clever thing. He doesn't just say all the gods. He just says the gods of earth. This is where the gods come from. They come from humanity. This is us creating them. This isn't the gods of the heavens. He's not saying that they're up there in the sky somewhere and they could do stuff. It's the gods of earth. It's our things. It's what we worship. And again, he's just subtly using his language to undermine what Aeron's beliefs are.
Yeah, very directly, very head on. It's interesting. It's something that we'll talk about a little more in detail later, is how he just he takes the toughest thing head on here. It's like attacking a high priest's faith. That is a tall order to break that down. But it's kind of neat because it's like I described this as like he's spitting in the face of the gods, and then we have this ironic moment where Aeron spits in his face. But even that backfires because he's like, I'm going to spit in your face. He's like, oh, well, thank you. I'm going to lick my finger. Like, what? Like, even this, he finds a way to undermine that and make it gross. Like, wow. But perhaps more importantly, almost certainly more importantly, is that some of the things Aeron sees in these visions are undeniably foreshadowing, because he couldn't possibly have known these things were coming. Like, he sees Euron armored in black scale, and then we see the Valyrian steel armor like a few paragraphs later. There's just, I can't see a way that that's not predictive. Like, he couldn't have just subconsciously imagined his brother in something that hasn't been mentioned. And then he sees all those gods impaled on the Iron Throne. And then a few minutes later, we've got priests strapped to prows, which is symbolically very similar, the death of all these gods. So would you agree with that? There's definitely some predictive power in there, or am I maybe taking that a little too far?
No, I think you're right, and I think that we're lucky in that we have one full, almost chapter-long example of when somebody drinks this shade of the evening and what that means. And we're told what that means in advance as well. So you will see things in the future, things that, and I can't remember the exact quote, but things that will be, and some things that may not come to pass. And so, and this is Dany, obviously, in the House of the Undying. And once you accept that is what it is, of course, yes, Aeron is going to see some things. Some of these things may well not come to pass, but some of them definitely will. So we can't trust in them 100%. But when you go back and go through, say, again, just using as the example, Dany, when she had her visions, actually very high proportion of them were true. There were a
Yeah.
couple of obvious examples of things that weren't, but the majority, the vast majority of them were true predictions, or looking back in time to things that actually happened. So there was definite magic happening here. It's not just like random coincidence.
Yeah, and like you say, it's important you point to Dany, not just Aeron, because we already sort of basically established that this stuff is magical. It wasn't like this. This is
Yeah.
more like sealing that evidence tight, something we pretty much already had confidence in. And you're right too. One of the things that the two visions have in common, since we're on the topic, the dwarfs. There's in Dany's version of the vision, they're ravaging, almost perhaps in a sexual way, the continent as if it's a woman, and it's like, well, this is a metaphor for these kings tearing this land apart, tearing apart the nation or the continent. And so now we have potentially a similar vision where we have these dwarfs capering for E.U.R.O.N and his mysterious mate. We'll come back to the mate in a second, but it's almost like the dwarfs, these kings, if these dwarfs represent the different kings of Westeros, then now they are subjugated for E.U.R.O.N, or they're dancing for his amusement, which might mean that by fighting amongst themselves, they're making it easier for him, something along those lines. How do you interpret the capering dwarfs?
Exactly the same way you do. I think that
Nice.
so you get this in Dany's vision, the dwarf, and I'm sure that George R. R. Martin, he will have been thinking about that. And again, it's not literal. We're not seeing a scene, a cut scene from the future when E.U.R.O.N's going to hire some dwarves to caper around in front of him. This is a symbolic thing. This is that what E.U.R.O.N wants is everybody causing destruction, because that is his aim. That's what he's trying to achieve in this sea battle, is just chaos and destruction. And he will, even if people think that they're doing their own things, if they are causing death and destruction and chaos, they are doing what E.U.R.O.N wants.
Well said. Yeah, and a certain character that loves chaos, Littlefinger, we're going to talk about him later as a comparison to E.U.R.O.N using some of the same methods, but E.U.R.O.N just goes farther. He really did hire dwarfs for the Red Wedding to upset someone. So hey,
Yeah.
but no, that's an aside. Now, as far as the part about dragons and krakens and sphinxes bowing to him, that's something we went into great detail on in our prior episodes. We have some what I think are decent theories on what all that means.
Yeah, I don't think we got really any suggestions on that in the show about sphinxes.
No,
so
I
that's
agree.
one that we're still just wondering.
Yeah. So Robert, if you have thoughts on those, I'd love to hear them, because I don't want to repeat what we've said. But I think the Kraken stuff maybe is kind of straightforward. The dragon stuff maybe too, but the Sphinx one maybe is the one that gives people a little trouble. Do you have thoughts on that? Do you think maybe it's the Citadel because they have Sphinxes out there? Maybe like an oblique reference to Alaris or Tyrion, who might be kind of a Sphinx as a character. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think just for those who haven't listened to your previous one, I'm assuming the Krakens will be summoned by the blood in the water. That was a very strong thing we got in Fire and Blood, the book. The dragons, obviously, he's got this whole crazy plan going on with Victarion and Dragonbinder and all the rest of it. The Sphinx, yeah, I think it's deliberately vague, but my best guess is this is Old Town. This is a symbol of Old Town, because just outside the Citadel you do have those two statues of Sphinxes, and they're the ones that, I mean, they're also, incidentally, there's Sphinxes outside the Great Hall in the Red Keep as well.
Good point.
So it could go either way, but I think the most likely is that this is symbolically, what is he going to gain some degree of control over the course of this, next half a book or something like that. It's going to be a dragon. I think it's going to be a dragon. He's going to be calling the Krakens deliberately, and Old Town he's going to gain control of. So I think that is just symbolically saying these things are now, they're bowing to him. These are the things that he has captured. They are under his control symbolically.
Right,
So
bow
I have a
down.
question there for you. I really like the idea of Old Town, of it being symbolic of Old Town. What do you make of the line, the Sphinx is the riddle, not the Riddler? In relation to that, I think that's the one that causes me doubt in terms of that interpretation.
I have sort of a new thought on that the show gave me, and that is because the show portrayed E.U.R.O.N slaughtering sand snakes. I don't think it will be those two. But if they were borrowing an idea they got from George about having those two plot lines smash into each other, the fate of Alaris could be wrapped up in what's being displayed here. Like she could be killed by E.U.R.O.N. or something.
Yeah, it still seems odd for it to be the fate. For it to be, the Sphinx is the riddle just because Alaris is killed.
Well, no, she wouldn't be like that wouldn't be the riddle though. No, I think she's a red herring for that comment. But...
Yes, so that's the big comment that makes me question things.
Okay, would you have any thoughts on that, Robert?
I mean, no, I agree. It's an intriguing little. I mean, it's one of those lines that it could just be throwaway, and we try and read too much into it, because if you just take it at very face level, it's that actually, you know what, she's not. Yeah, oh, he is not who you think he is. So, at a very face level, you could just interpret it as that. Now. Beyond that, then yes, I think you could say who is the most Sphinx-like, riddle-like person that we've got here that we simply do not understand. For me, it is E.U.R.O.N, and so I think that there's a link across to that there. But George R. R. Martin does these things on various levels. I think he did mean it on that very, Alaras is not who you think that he is. I think that's definitely there, but then we'll be able to look back and go, oh, okay, so there was another layer going on here as well.
So you're right to say that maybe this part is not the direct connection to Cher, but maybe it is. But I do wonder about this as an aside about Alaris as potential hostage.
I mean, to be fair, I think it is possible for it to be Old Town is the riddle, not the Riddler. I don't think that's a weird statement, but I don't know how I would explain that exactly. Yeah. Like what you have to solve Old Town to get this information. That's where you find, like maybe it has to do with the Jon Snow stuff. I don't know. That's where the riddle is instead of the Riddler, as in Old Town asking everyone questions.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's the store of information, isn't it? That's what Old Town is effectively. This is where we have the information. They may have information about Valyrian steel. They may have information about Jon. They may well have information about the First Long Night. They may well have information about how to kill a dragon. This is where the information is, and that is going to come out presumably at some point in this next book.
Yeah, that is a huge question. Like, what does he want with the place? We have some ideas, but there's so many things that we might not have thought of that could be part of it. And you're right to mention the connection there to the Sphinxes the way you did as well. And the other part of this vision that I want to bring up that might or might not be connected is this shadowy mate with hands alive with pale white fire. We've seen pale white fire in a few places. This is another thing we've discussed in the past. I'm mostly just interested in your take on this. Do you think this is an evidence of Cersei, Melisandre, Viserion, or someone else? Or what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's symbolic.
It could be multiples. It doesn't have to be one person.
Yeah, so I don't think so. I mean, just working through my logic of what happens, I think Cersei is going to be by E.U.R.O.N's side. And this does make sense for it to be her. I think that pale, I mean, we're already thinking about like her pale white throat and all the rest of it. She is probably going to be, and given the fact that we've got E.U.R.O.N and again Qyburn, keep on coming back to him. Who is this person who is all about bringing people back from the dead? Qyburn. Could there be some like crazy twist here that Cersei is not just going to be this character that we saw on the TV show, but might actually turn into some kind of could she get injured? Could she be sort of brought back as a sort of a semi-undead kind of? I don't know.
I'm with you.
Exactly.
I entertained these ideas during the show as well, so I'm with you there. I mean, obviously, it didn't happen, but it's not so tinfoil. Maybe a little tinfoil, but not. I think it's reasonable enough as a certainly fun.
I don't think it's tinfoil in the fact I genuinely do not know, but all of the building blocks are there for it to be possible and for it to work out. So it would flow with the narrative if that's where it ends up, and for her therefore to be. I mean, the pale white fire is a thing I've not looked into hugely. I mean, but I think that for her to be in that vision makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah, right on. So it seems that Euron acquired the wine of the warlocks in the east. Near Karth, probably got it from the warlocks, Pyat and them. It's interesting that he not only is forcing Aeron to drink it, but he wanted Victarion to drink it too. I think he really does think that it'll get them more on his wavelength, at least to some degree.
Open your mind, brother.
Open your mind. You need to trip with me, and yeah. So I wonder, though, is he hooked on this stuff? Is he addicted? It's interesting to consider. We've seen a lot of people, a lot of characters who drink too much given the responsibility they hold over other people. Right? Robert, Cersei, Tyrion. Not you, Robert, but Robert Baratheon, obviously. No. It would be fitting for Euron to, again, top them all by being worse in a way that we couldn't have possibly imagined. It can always get worse by being addicted to something that's far more destructive than alcohol. This stuff, giving him ideals about world domination, about becoming a god. I mean, I've seen people get pretty megalomaniacal on alcohol, but this is just something else. Like, I've never seen somebody like, I'm gonna become a god after a bender. That's a bit much. And
clearly not been on the right kind of bender there, as it has to be said.
I guess not. Jeez, yeah. Farther to the east is perhaps where he gleaned additional, say, inspiration. Places like Yi, where god emperors sort of still rule, maybe not quite with the power they used to have. But during the time of the Long Night, this was more normal. And of course, Valyria, the people ruling Valyria, they weren't kings, but they wielded so much power. And it seems like this is what Euron wants. He wants that level of power over as much as he can. Here's a really interesting question that was floated by a couple of different people that we should consider here, Robert. Something else interesting about the visions is that what's not in them. We've seen over and over and over how George loves to do like oblique world building or oblique POV setup where one POV has something happen in their chapter that has nothing to do with their story, but is pretty big for a POV that's maybe concurrent. Like, for example, Brienne, all that stuff about the Deep Ones in Brienne's chapter with, like, what's that got to do with her? Probably nothing. It might not have anything to do with anyone, honestly. But it almost certainly doesn't have anything to do with her. If anything, it's got to do with, like, this plot line or something. Or the history of the Ironborn. It was like Ironborn history in a Brienne chapter, basically. Like, so, like, and we've gotten countless examples of this where George, like, introduces a concept in one chapter that does, that's meant for a different character, like Arianne going into the Rainwood. There was all sorts of stuff, like going into those caves, right? When sees all the stone trees with the werewoods. Like, what's that got to do with Arianne's plot line? Probably not much, but it probably has a lot to do with other plot lines. So that's cool. So what's not in these visions, or what is, they're very focused on Euron. Like Dany's visions were a little more expansive, but you wonder if there's anything guiding them here. Like when Bran has his werewood paste dream, those visions were maybe guided. They were very specific. They were going back. They had an order to them, chronological order. It wasn't entirely random. So the question basically is there something guiding these visions? Is Euron having more of an impact on what Aeron is seeing than we might guess because it's so focused on him? One possible answer is a glass candle. I'll throw this out at you as an option, and you can run with it. Euron may have a glass candle. One potential example of this and why he might have it is they seem to know a lot about where the Red Wine fleet is, very specifically, and the fleet that's coming the other direction as well. They're trying to trap us between them. Well, there's ways they could know that manually, but it's a little suspicious that they don't have some other means at work. Second of all, glass candles are specifically told to us as something that can invade the dreams of other people. When they were introduced, that's a very specific thing we're told that they can do. And thus, it's a big theory as to what's happened with Dany and some of her dreams. They've been guided from afar by, say, Quaithe or someone else. Just like you suppose Qyburn may not animate only one person. We might have glass candles popping up in other places, just like we've had 2 people drink Shade of the Even, or 3 people drink Shade of the Even, 2 people that we've had POVs for. I've given you a lot to work with here. What do you think about guided visions, glass candles, any of that?
Let's start with how an unguided as far as we understand it, use of Shade of the Evening / Weirwood paste is. And I'm working on the assumption, I'm sure you share, that Shade of the Evening is a sort of a warped anti-Weirwood paste. It works in sort of the same way, but in a kind of a distorted fashion.
There's definitely some similarities. Yeah, gotta agree.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and the taste is a really big thing.
Yes.
The whenever Bran and Dany and then Aeron here, they have it. The description of the taste is very, very similar. Now, what happens with Bran is that he then seems to sort of rush into like the vision world, whatever it is, and he immediately goes, and we get, I think even Bloodraven points this out, he just goes to where his heart is. He goes to what is closest to him. He sees a vision of his father. He sees the vision of what's happening in the Weirwood tree at Winterfell. He could go anywhere with this, but he goes to where he is wanting to be, what's close to him. Dany, similarly, she has a lot of visions going on there, but she has like the first, I think it's 5, and of those, what does she have visions of? She has visions of the house with the red door, which is one of the important points about her. The state of Westeros, which is a thing that she's clearly be caring about. She has a vision of her brother. She has a vision of her father. These are the things which are closest to her. What we have here again with Aeron, he does that. What first of all, this vision of E.U.R.O.N, this thing that it's one of his touchstones where his psychological damage comes from. Similarly with E.U.R.O.N and in E.U.R.O.N invades it. So maybe E.U.R.O.N does have a way into this and is guiding this. But this, as much as anything else, it starts out in the same way that you would expect this to be starting out, with what is closest and what is on his mind in the deeper depths of his heart. That is where Aeron goes. So that's the starting point. Then after that, it goes out into what is going on with E.U.R.O.N, which again kind of makes sense because everything about Aeron at that time is about E.U.R.O.N. What's E.U.R.O.N doing? He's crazy? What's going on? He's captured me. So this is what we would expect. So I don't think necessarily this means that E.U.R.O.N is guiding this in some way, but he could be. So I think that's my sort of overall thought there, is that he is his sort of spiritual visions go where you would expect them to.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's just how a drug would work. Your mind is thinking about something, so that's what your visions are about. And also, these are visions. They aren't exactly the same as just a dream to me.
Right.
And so bringing up the glass candles, I just don't think that they're a necessary explanation, although when it comes to dreams, they might be relevant.
Right on. Yeah, so there's a couple iterations possible here. It sounds like we're sort of down on the idea of glass candle being directly involved here, which doesn't necessarily preclude the idea that he has one for other purposes, or that he has one in general. Or
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
This doesn't just cancel the idea entirely. It just maybe doesn't work for this particular portion, but though it might. So I tend to agree with your take there, but I like considering the other possibilities, even if they're a little more remote. As well, I would throw in. It reminds me of Timothy Leary, who was the big advocate of taking LSD, and he did it a lot himself, and he would help other people when they took it. He would guide them and like say things, suggest things, help them prepare. Like he knew what things to surround yourself with and how to be talked to make it be pleasant. It's like the bad trip concept. Where E.U.R.O.N is trying to inflict a bad trip on Aeron, whereas someone like a doctor, psychologist would be trying to do the opposite. So to me, this is E.U.R.O.N's inversion of that. He's like, he knows that this drug can cause terrible dark vision, but that's what he wants.
That's true for Daenerys too, for her experience.
You're right.
They did not make it a good experience for her.
They sort of wanted her to be distracted by it, so they could, steal her soul or whatever. I don't know what exactly they were doing there, but it wasn't good. So let's talk too about how he inflates himself. Let's move on to a concept that we mostly have applied to Melisandre, the trappings of power. No one explains this like her, so this is part of why she's the starting point here. She talks about it openly as important. She says power flows itself from the trappings of power in some small measure. She sells mundane tricks as magic in order to make her other magic look more powerful, in order to make herself look more powerful. She has real magic, but she also has tricks that she pretends are magic. Euron does the same thing, except he's not open about it like Melisandre. For example, his seamanship. He took the Shield Islands by not following the shore. He followed the winds and went out to sea, and they're like, oh, he controls the winds, but that's just advanced seamanship. If he brings Krakens to the surface with blood, it might look like magic. A lot of people are going to be like, oh my gosh, he's got the drowned god's ear. He's got the sorcery, I don't know what, blood magic. But it might just be science. Krakens like blood. They come to the surface. I mean, is that kind of how you fall on this? He's going to try to make it look like the priests are relevant, but really just any blood
Yeah,
will do?
I agree. I don't know about Robert, but I think it's not magic, and he doesn't think it's magic, and he knows that blood will do it.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that the Krakens, in particular, to say Fire and Blood, it was 3 or 4 times we had the same image in or message in Fire and Blood.
Yeah.
That the Krakens were there because of the blood in the sea, and so that surely is going to be picked up again. The point here is that why does he want the Krakens? Yes, they create huge amounts of damage and all the rest of it. My take, and I can't remember whether we're going to come onto this, but I want to plant the seed of it at least here.
Okay.
I said with Aeron that this is the beginning of whatever his arc is going to be in this book. And we're very clear here, his faith is, yes, it's challenged, but he comes through nice and strong. I think E.U.R.O.N would have known that would have happened. I personally think that he's clever enough to realize, you know what, this guy, he wanders a lot, he drinks seawater, he doesn't have a house, so he just like sleeps rough all the time. His faith is incredibly strong. Simply putting him in a dungeon and making him have a couple of psychotic dreams or psychoactive dreams or whatever, that's not going to break him. What might break Aeron is the question that keeps on coming to my mind. What is it that could? E.U.R.O.N knows him well. Would the idea that the Krakens, this very symbol of the Ironborn, this very symbol of their faith, seemingly are following what E.U.R.O.N wants, would that be a thing that would be an apparent, not just him saying words to Aeron, not just him sort of like torturing him, but actually apparently showing that the drowned god is doing as he commands? Maybe that could be a thing which could break him. I'm not saying it will, but I do wonder whether this is part of E.U.R.O.N's plan, as he is wanting Aeron to see this. If we accept the fact he's going to survive the sort of the battle, or some of the battle at the very least, he is wanting him to see this.
That is a great theory. I like that a lot. And just to add on to that, an idea I had was that if people believe he can do that, which they will if he does it, he can be like, look, no trade goes to Old Town unless I say. I have control of the seas in a way that no one has had control of the seas before. It's not just my ships that rule the seas, which he will have that also. If he destroys the Red Wine fleet, they'll be the only fleet of consequence in the entire continent. So he's like, not only do I have the only fleet, but I can summon Krakens. Like, talk about ruling the seas in a way the Ironborn have never done before, and they have ruled the seas before. So this is just a like everything on steroids, or on on Ryan of the Warlocks. So I like that idea a lot. In terms of proof of concept for Aeron, like there's only so much he can deny if the very largest creatures of the sea bow to his brother. You're right. It might be pretty difficult for him to continue denying what's happening. Some other examples of what E.U.R.O.N does to establish his power, to elevate himself. Prior to all this, just some of the basics like his magic, the sailing different places, the blue lips, which is the difference between rumor and fact. Like, you can't, someone's like, oh, he drinks Shade of the Evening. Well, it's not a rumor when you see him and you see those blue lips. You're like, okay, that's confirmed. Some of the other things you wouldn't necessarily know for sure. They might just be stories. But when you have the visuals like that, the black sails and the red hull, that's really expensive. To making all your sails black, that is really expensive. Not that E.U.R.O.N hasn't had plenty of means to do this, but it's part of it. Just goes to show his character. He's willing to spend and spend and spend for his image. The eye patch, we've talked about why in one of our prior episodes why he has that. Of course, he doesn't need it, but it's part of all this. Now we add to this, though. It's like he's leveling up even more. The shark tooth crown is pretty cool. Never seen anything like that. But the Valyrian steel armor, this fits in really well with what you were just saying. It's an extremely similar concept. He did not believe E.U.R.O.N. He's like, no, you didn't go to Valyria. You didn't go to Valyria. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But then he sees the armor, and what does he think? Oh my God, E.U.R.O.N. really did go to Valyria. So with what you're saying with the Kraken and breaking his faith, this is, like he was adamant that didn't happen, and then he saw something that he took as proof. Now, was it really proof, though? One idea that we didn't necessarily have back when we first did these episodes was that we were kind of against it. We were like Aeron. We were like, nah, he didn't go to Valyria. Even with this, we're like, I just don't see how it's possible. Now my attitude is he went, but he didn't go personally on shore. He made his slaves do it, like the Valyrians do, going down into those mines to deal with fireworms and gases and burns. It's a similar concept. Where do you fall on this? Do you think E.U.R.O.N went to Valyria? Do you think he used proxies like this, or do you have some other take entirely?
My only take is that we will never find out. And it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's genuinely isn't the important point, as you say, is that people start believing that he did. And again, Fire and Blood built up once more quite how dangerous this is going to Valyria.
Area,
when we had with Balerion and Area, that shows us that if E.U.R.O.N did go there, then that makes him not just a crazy person, that makes him just a completely unique. The armies have gone into there, navies have sailed in there, Dragon has gone back in, and they've not come out. If he did, then this is really something very, very special. But he's never going to say, no, actually, you know what, I didn't. I just sent some people in there to grab some stuff. He's never going to do that. Yeah, we're never going to get there's no witnesses to it other than the people who his crew, and he's cut their tongues out. So we're never going to find out, and that's the point of it, is that it is just more of his hype. Maybe it's true, I don't know, but nobody knows. He's got some evidence to suggest that this might be the case, and that will be enough to convince some people. And then he's going to keep on getting more bits of, hey, E.U.R.O.N, he's got a dragon. That's like amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, E.U.R.O.N, he's got Valyrian steel armor. That's amazing. He's got Krakens. That's amazing. And then the more things he can add into this, and there will be more. And this, incidentally, I think it's part of the Old Town thing. He knows if there's anywhere in Westeros that has got really cool things that he can use to be just bigging himself up more, causing more damage and chaos, there's one place where that is, it's Old Town.
Yep.
So that is part of the reason why he's going there.
Do you believe any possible connection between him and the possible Jaqen H'ghar inside the Citadel? We assume that's Jaqen. It might just be some other faceless man. Where do you fall on the spectrum of the possibility that that's the same one who killed Balon and thus maybe is working with E.U.R.O.N in some way? In fact, maybe that's how he's a path to them getting inside the Citadel. Someone that's inside that can open the door for them, something like that. What do you think about all this?
I think there's three options. I think that is option number one, and that is entirely possible, that he's still effectively in the pay of E.U.R.O.N. They're not just hired hands to go off and do stuff for you. Right. They are assassins. So it would have to be him killing someone in the in the Citadel, or causing and if we, as I think we probably mostly now do believe, they were behind the doom of Valyria, maybe he's going to do a mass killing. Maybe that's what he's hired for. So I think that is a very clear option. I think there's 3 possibilities. That being one. The second is just like something that we genuinely don't. Someone else has hired him that we genuinely don't know about. That George R. R. Martin might tell us a bit about later. He was just introduced in the last book as coming in there, so we don't know. And the third one, which is something that I've played, I did a couple of videos on this ages ago, and this works for me, which is that the Faceless Men, they're not just like a cool bunch of assassins with some cool catchphrases. When they say all men must die, that isn't just like hey, this is a cool greeting we do, this will make us sound great. That's actually their statement of faith and belief. Everyone must die. And the moment you start thinking this is a religious cult, not just a group of assassins, you go, what are they looking around at the world at this moment in time? If your fundamental belief is that everyone must die, when it's your moment, you die, that's it, you're gone. If that is your fundamental belief, and you look around and you see north of the wall dead bodies being brought back as whites, you're seeing Qyburn there bringing people back from dead, you're seeing the Red Priests bringing people back from the dead, you're seeing death is being defied everywhere.
That's pretty bad for there,
Exactly. If the moment you think that this is a religious cult who believes that that is heresy of the First Order, they do not have to be hired by someone to do something. This could be them going out of their way, working out how do we do this? How do we stop this happening? How do we play our role in preventing all of this heresy everywhere? And that, I think, is something which is an incredibly powerful possibility, that he is there to get the knowledge of how do you stop all of this undeadness happening.
That's really interesting. Yeah, looking at him, and if we take this a step farther, if they look at him as some sort of means to something that they would want to see happen. Like you say, the idea of eternal life, which is being preached by Bonero for those who follow Daenerys, that's got to be horrific to people who believe in death being the only absolute. It's like, well, actually, death is not absolute. Like, wait a second, that was the one thing we could count on. So yeah, you're right. That's like, from an existential perspective, it could be maybe not terrifying is not the right word, because they don't seem like people who would get terrified, but something to take direct action against above all else. Something to take seriously like that. That's really, really good way to approach this mystery. Staying on the topic of the trappings of power, and power being a matter of perception, there's no one better to consider than Varys, and the power is a shadow on the wall riddle, which is a good segue towards how E.U.R.O.N may pump himself up through a combination of belief. Like you said, it doesn't matter whether he went to Valyria, other than our own curiosity to some point. Like, he's really got the Krakens and the Valyrian steel armor. Does it really matter where he got them? And no, not other than for our curiosity, I guess not. Yeah. So, because it's going to level him up, rise him up, and put him above all these people and above everyone. And that's the shadow on the wall. If that shadow is cast by the light of a true visit to Valyria or a false one, it doesn't matter to E.U.R.O.N. He's got that power either way. This next quote, which I would love it if you read for us, Robert, is perhaps as direct as E.U.R.O.N. gets, while we also mix in this a couple of bits of vision here as well.
Sure. The bleeding star bespoke the end, he said to Aeron. These are the last days, when the world shall be broken and remade. A new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits. Then E.U.R.O.N. lifted a great horn to his lips and blew, and dragons and krakens and sphinxes came at his command and bowed before him. Kneel, brother, the crow's eye commanded. I am your king. I am your god. Worship me, and I will raise you up to be my priest.
Right on. That is such a good quote. I wonder if that's just another example of him just taking natural phenomena and ascribing it to this. Like, I don't know that I believe E.U.R.O.N believes that about the the Red Star, but he's certainly willing to use it. As you pointed out, it's also not terribly important, which is true because it's going to have the same effect either way. But how can a man become a god? Like, how can this really be true beyond just perception? Because for him, it will go beyond perception. He really does have some magic underpinning all this, at least to some degree. If we were to break down how Ramsay tortured Theon, we would note that there was more sophistication than Joffrey's version of torture. He just liked it. Joffrey just liked torturing people. There wasn't really a point to it. He just enjoyed it. Ramsay also enjoyed it, but he had a point. He wanted to make Theon see the world differently, to enslave him. He forced a new reality on him. He's like, you're not Theon, you're Reek. You're not human, you're a dog. I didn't hurt you, you made me hurt you. Right? He just, Stockholm Syndrome, capped all the different psychological tricks that he used on him. You want to smell awful. That's what you want to be. You don't want to be cleaned up. Just all these things. He removed your finger, right? He cuts your finger off because it's hurting you, and then you thank him for it, even though he's the one who put you in that state in the first place. So Ramsay sort of became Theon's god. Now, as we pointed out, it didn't hold. Theon broke free of that. And this is kind of where I wonder if the story is going with E.U.R.O.N. If they're going to hold on to him, or if he's going to be able to. How people are going to eventually break free of this, because I don't suppose the book's going to end with E.U.R.O.N. just winning, like the Dream of Spring ends and E.U.R.O.N. is on the throne. That would be a pretty big surprise. So at some point it has to break down. Something has to go wrong. Something has to defeat him. And it might be Daenerys might be a part of that. It might be other characters. The reason I think of Daenerys is because of so much of this there's so much deception going on with E.U.R.O.N. And she is the slayer of lies. Now, we tend to ascribe that towards the Phagon presumed lie, but there's no reason why there can't be other lies in play that are particularly important, like this one.
So you don't think Jaime Lannister is going to take down Euron Greyjoy?
I'm somewhat dubious of that one. What do you think, Rob? You think Jaime's going to kill Euron in the books? I guess it's possible.
I'm going to give that a big fat no,
Yeah.
I have to say. It's. He killed Show Euron.
Yeah.
And Show Euron is not book Euron.
Yeah. And Show Euron was pretty excited about how that went, too, because he's like, and I killed you. You're going to die.
I don't know. No lions bowed to him or came at his command.
Well, the one thing I would pull out from that, though, is that we have to say that if we accept or we suspect that Euron and Cersei may get together in some way, and if we suspect that perhaps Jaime's kind of redemption arc may not be fully complete and he may go back to Cersei in some way at the end, then there will be some confrontation there. That's the only thing I'd say, and I haven't explored that point any further. But you take season 8, or I personally take season 8, as you think you get a lot of the ending big beats.
Yes.
Are probably roughly right, but the exact detail and certainly the build up is going to be different, and so I think that it makes story sense that if Euron and Cersei join up, and if Jaime comes back, then there will be friction between Euron and Jaime. So that does ring true for me.
Yeah, I kind of see that. That's why I said we shouldn't totally throw the idea out. It seems a little weird, but you're right. It might just be the way the show did it. It looks weird, but it might just develop an entirely different way, but still have a similarity in the way the end game looks. Based on like what body is lying there with what person standing over them with what sword, something like that. So let's consider how this is a microcosm of what E.U.R.O.N. wants. I'm going to read a passage that Nina wrote here. From their first meeting, it's clear that E.U.R.O.N. conflates kingship with godhood. His goal is not a temporal crown, but the position of God King, ruling over the lives and souls of everyone below him. When Aeron demands that E.U.R.O.N. release him because the god commands it, E.U.R.O.N. overrides that command with his own order, saying your king commands it. Later in vision form, Euron demands that Aeron worships him by saying, I am your king, I am your god. He's both. Euron's ongoing desire throughout this chapter is to get Aeron to recognize him, Euron, as his god. This isn't just an expression of his own horrific quest for apotheosis, although it is. It's more than that. It's a reflection of the sort of total abusive victory wants over Aeron, and pretty much everyone else, too, but starting with his own family, the people he's closest to, the people that can... if he breaks Aeron, I mean, if Aeron, this tough guy, super priest, actually flips and works for Euron, how many other people would flip as well? It's a huge difference. And so this sadistic pattern of abuse, Nina writes, is to hit people where they seem strongest. Back in The Prophet, Euron had tried to use Aeron's faith to force him to recognize him as the rightful king. It's like, look, your beliefs demand this. And then, of course, Aeron takes his side route to do the King's Moot, which only ends up making things worse, as we know. And, of course, this is eating away at Aeron a little bit. He's like, look, you yourself said the King's Moot would be decided by the drowned god, and it picked me. So who are you really going against here? And that's just really hard for Aeron to reckon with. So I think that this is what we're looking at. What I said in the synopsis was Euron wants to do to Westeros, perhaps the world, what Ramsay did to Theon, right? Make him dependent, then dominate what's left. And that's part of what we get in that description of blackened skulls. The new god will be born from the charnel pits. Charnel pits are that's like a mass grave. So he's pretty literally saying that after I'm done wrecking as much of Westeros as possible, I'll rule what's left. And that's basically what Ramsay did to Theon. Do you think that works as a metaphor for you? Is that kind of what Euron trying to do on a large scale? Would you add anything to that, or maybe say it differently?
No, I mean, I think it's a good... I do really like the way that you talk about, you get Joffrey, who's like, your starting point, and then you get Ramsay, who has this kind of same kind of theme going through there, but is extra, and then you get E.U.R.O.N, who's again the same kind of theme, but extra. So that it definitely works for me. That is where this is sort of going. To be a god, I think in this context is as much as anything who people worship. And that is, if he can be worshipped, I think that will be him considering himself to be a god. And so, yes, what Ramsay did with Theon was along that way. It tried to make him have complete devotion to him. And so what E.U.R.O.N is doing is to try to get people to have complete devotion to him through fear, as well as every other kind of emotion that he can get. Then yeah, absolutely, it's about getting people to worship him.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. Another great notation here from Nina is the theme of how Euron is perhaps a harbinger or aid or usher for the long night. And this chapter gives us a taste of that. Aeron is kept in darkness nearly the entire time. He's Nina writes, this is kind of like his dark night of the soul, which is, that's a phrase that has a lot of meaning for people in their personal belief system. So it's very literal, the dark night here, and he's in spiritual peril, so to speak, where his faith is really being tested. And as you say, you're right to suspect that maybe his faith will break. It's holding for now, but you make a very good point that Euron is smart enough to realize what's happening, just like he knew how Victarion would react to the prodding and psychological needling he gave him. He's like, I'm going to tell him he's chicken. That'll get him to go. Like, what, are you afraid? Yeah. He's like, Now, to be fair, Victarion's a lot easier to manipulate than Aeron. But that's the thing. When you're a zealot, everyone knows how you feel about things. There's no secrets. Like your positions are out in the open, and you have very little wiggle room when you're a zealot. So it's almost like Aikido. Euron's trapped Aeron within his own beliefs and say, look, your God is proving that I'm the one. Like, if you believe your God chose and then look, I'm doing it. I'm restoring the old way. This is what it looks like. You just don't like it because it's me.
Yeah, and another really interesting point, I think, with Aeron is you get someone like Victarion. Victarion's been Victarion all his life. Aeron has turned his life upside down, his beliefs once already. He started out, he was like the life and soul of the party, drinking and having fun and all the rest of it. And then he almost drowned, or did drown and just survived. And then he shifted completely to become this austere, the character that we know now, this austere priest. So he can do it. His brain is capable of completely shifting his entire worldview. And E.U.R.O.N will know that. He will know that it is possible for Aeron to completely shift from one way to another way.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah. But I will say it didn't work for Ramsay in the long run. When Theon got back out into the world and Ramsay had other problems and wasn't focused on him 100% of the time, and Ramsay wasn't just keeping him locked in a dungeon, when Theon speaks to other people, especially when he interacts with the werewood, especially when Bran speaks to him and helps him remember who he is. So it's like Ramsay wasn't the only god around. There's no longer this proof of concept that I'm the only one who matters. There's clearly another powerful supernatural presence with real godlike powers, unlike Ramsay, actually speaking to Theon and guiding him a little bit. Now, I think if you think of that sort of recovery that Theon has, it's not a full recovery, but it's a partial recovery, and it's notable because he at least recovers his identity. That may also be what we're looking at in the aftermath of E.U.R.O.N. If we're looking way ahead, perhaps past the Dream of Spring, or not past, but past the threat of the others. Let's presuppose, and it may not go this way, but let's presuppose that E.U.R.O.N. outlasts the others. Then he'll still be around for the final act as a major villain, potentially with Cersei as an ally or subjugate, whatever, depending on how that all goes. So Theon might be somewhat of a metaphor for the recovery that Westeros will have to have. Like it's never going to be the same. Some of that trauma will never be forgotten or gotten over, but it'll be Westeros again. It'll still have it'll recover its identity. And that works really well for me as a metaphor. I wonder if that's going to be how it goes, or if it's just kind of wishful thinking. But have you thought ahead to the end game like that, in that sense, like the recovery, the great aftermath?
I have. Just one more thing, just on that. Aeron, does he change? Does he sort of go over or not? Just I think I don't know. I'm just opening up the possibility that maybe he does. This isn't the end of the story, but I think the crucial thing is that George R.R. Martin, probably when writing this chapter, he's a Gardner writer. He tells us this all the time. He may well not have known at this point. He may well, when writing this, be still open-minded. He's saying, yeah, okay, so obviously this isn't going to break Aeron. But what happens in the next chapter, will that? He probably will discover that. I mean, I'm guessing he might have written it now, but he was probably discovering that as he was writing it. In terms of sort of the end game, my take is another thing George R. R. Martin said that we all know when he talks about what's the ending going to be like, and he says, bittersweet, and we always come through what does bittersweet. If you read the quote, he explains what he means by bittersweet, and he gives a concrete example, a couple of concrete examples, both from the Lord of the Rings, and he says it's like Frodo is there, and yes, he saves the day through his actions, but he's a broken person after it and cannot enjoy the fruits of the victory and all the rest of it. That for me is a very bittersweet thing, and that I think is, I mean, I don't know whether I've said it to you before, but one of my pithy, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I think quite accurate perceptions that George R. R. Martin is writing Jon, for example, as if he's Aragorn, this great returning king, subject of prophecy and all the rest of it, but in reality he's Frodo. And though at the end of it Frodo had to leave Middle-earth and go on because the world wasn't for him anymore, and that echoes where we're seeing Jon probably ending up at the end of all of this as well. He's going to be a broken man. But to return back to the other thing that George R. R. Martin said when he's explaining what he meant by bittersweet, again in the Lord of the Rings, he sort of showers praise on the scouring of the Shire, which is the penultimate chapter of the Lord of the Rings. It wasn't in the movies, but it's George R. R. Martin thinks this is a wonderful thing. And basically, the hobbits come back and spoilers if you've never read the books, but the hobbits come back to the Shire, and hey, the Shire's not as they left it. It's been taken over by this big baddie. This big baddie is Saruman, who is effectively the secondary big bad of this story. We've got Sauron, but Saruman's the second big bad of this story, and they use effectively the skills that they have gained in order through this story to be restoring their own land to how it should be. And this is what and getting rid of Saruman. And this is what George R. R. Martin says he is going to be basing the feel of the end of A Song of Ice and Fire on that.
Nice.
So we have to look at the end of A Song of Ice and Fire and go, okay, so once the big baddie's gone, this is the high level, once, let's say, the others have been got rid of, who's going to be the second big bad that has to be dealt with? Well, yeah, and E.U.R.O.N as a sort of a Saruman substitute kind of works for me.
It does.
I have to say. It works really well. So this idea that after they've done everyone like huge sigh of relief, we've dealt with this big problem, or the big problems of ice and fire. What now? Well, we've still got E.U.R.O.N to deal with.
They're still picking up the pieces, and
exactly.
And just like and just like your example says, like Saruman helped Sauron get back into the world, and then after Sauron's gone, Saruman's still there, and that would also be pretty fitting for E.U.R.O.N helping the others do their thing, surviving them, and then continuing on after they've wrecked all this destruction, because that's part of his goal. They're a little less connected to each other than Saruman and Sauron, but still, that's a really good parallel. I like that.
Well, it's, as I say, I'd highly recommend. You can just Google it when you say George R. R. Martin. I can't remember who the interview was with, but when he's talking about Bittersweet, he then goes on to talk about those things. It's well worth just digging into what he says. So this isn't just me coming out with Lord of the Rings parallels because I like the Lord of the Rings. This is him coming out with these parallels and saying that's what the feel of this is going to be at the end.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great take. If we return to the concept of charnel pits, and he says a new god will be born from that, not only do we have all this like darkness metaphor and ushering in darkness that fits nicely with E.U.R.O.N ushering in the long night or helping to usher it in, so does this, because we have all these mass death that's being referred to, a god emerging from all these corpses. Well, the corpses of the whites, if they're the Walking Dead, that adds a different angle to this, him using that great destruction / distraction of an army of the dead to gain more power fits quite nicely with this symbolism here and with that dream. And it's so bad. I mean, George is so creative with this character. It's the most selfish character I can think of. I mean, this guy, he literally wants to inflict supreme pain on everyone for his own satisfaction, like every being. Not just physical, but emotional. Like he wants to rule everything and every aspect of it. It's the most opposite to the notion of communal that I could think of. It's like all for one, no, one for all, no, all for one. E.U.R.O.N is the one. Real briefly, fatherhood I think is interesting. Like Joffrey, we keep talking to making these comparisons to the previous act villains. Like Joffrey is a lot of fathering in terms of why Joffrey came out the way he is. Like Robert's really brutal. Robert was a great warrior. Robert hit him at least once, and this is very likely part of why Joffrey came out the way he did. I mean, possibly would have been kind of bad anyway. Obviously, Cersei wasn't a very good mother either, but still. When you think about that with Ramsay, it's even bigger. Like, obviously, Ramsay wanted to be worthy of a Bolton, wanted to be worthy of his father in particular, who was just really brutal to him, the way he talked to him and all that. I don't know if E.U.R.O.N had issues with Kellon Greyjoy. That's something that I wonder if George wants to get a little more human with E.U.R.O.N, or just have him just be a little more supernatural and just have this just come because of the drugs and all the other stuff. I'm not sure, but I wonder if that's going to be a thing that emerges, because that's just such a big part of A Song of Ice and Fire, living in the shadow of your father, living in the shadow of prior generations. Kellon, literally a big man, 6'6". I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that kind of just probably not that important, or is that something that maybe you find compelling? I'm curious about it. We don't have much to go on, but yeah.
We don't have much to go on. I mean, I think certainly I would definitely agree with both Ramsay and Joffrey. and not just them, but huge amounts of other characters. Tyrion's living in his father's shadow. Jon is as well, of Ned's shadow, certainly. And then you get all the way through. So many of these characters are like that. But we don't. I mean, Quellon Greyjoy comes across as being sort of just stereotypical Ironborn, and I don't think that that's. I mean, he was more, but he hasn't been. Other than that, this is a culture that he has grown up. E.U.R.O.N has grown up in. I don't think that that's a specific thing that's going there. I love this, which you touched on earlier. This idea of maybe Bloodraven made contact with him. We don't know exactly what happened there. If this was a rejection in some way, then that could be like the sort of the father image that we've got going on there, a rejection by somebody who's a potential mentor. That I think is perhaps the slightly stronger link, because he is aping so much of. I mean, even right down to the one eye thing is that this is so, and the crows and all the rest of it. This is so building on the imagery of Bloodraven, that seems to be in his subconscious at the very least.
Yeah. Right on. Well said. All right, let's move downwards towards this section where we've got called the Death of Gods, and it's some of this we touched on before. Like, if gods made the world and life is cruel, then gods are cruel, and Euron sort of embodying that. And with the Ironborn, that really works. Now, I'm not sure if Euron will approach it differently with different cultures. Likely, he'll just use some form of brutality and manipulation. But with the Ironborn, we've already seen how big this is a part of their culture in the first place. And this really fits in with what you were saying about maybe Euron expecting that he wouldn't be able to break his brother, because Euron knows that his brother is accustomed to pain. All the Ironborn are. Like, he inflicts it on himself. He's a zealot that walks out in the water naked in the cold and sleep. Like you said, he sleeps out in the wilderness and just takes on all sorts of physical deprivations as part of his faith. So he's already used to suffering to get closer to God, which is part of. So in a sense, this is bringing him closer to the drowned God, even as Euron's saying, the drowned God is fake. So as he's allowing his brother to feel this faith, he's undermining it at the same moment. And that's really interesting, because it fits so well with what they already believe. And I think this is part of why your idea is really strong there. Now let's have another quote here. This is the moment where the Iron Throne comes into the vision and he sees all the different gods. Do you have this one on screen, Robert?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Now it was. So I'll start that one again. Mm-hmm. Now it was metal underneath the crow's eye, a great, tall, twisted seat of razor-sharp iron, barbs and blades and broken swords, all dripping blood. Impaled upon the longer spikes were the bodies of the gods. The maiden was there, and the father and the mother, the warrior and crone and smith, even the stranger. They hung side by side with all manner of queer foreign gods, the great shepherd and the black goat, three-headed Troios and the pale child Bacalon, the lord of light and the butterfly god of Narth. And there, swollen and green, half devoured by crabs, the drowned god festered with the rest, seawater still dripping from his hair.
As I said before, this is great foreshadowing as well for all them being tied to the prows of the ships. Now, why do you suppose he needs such a varied group of priests? Is it just because he wants to show his dominion over as many as possible, or do you think there's something else to it, maybe?
Well, just on that quote, I think that you're very right about the foreshadowing the priest and the prows, but I think there's another angle to this, the kind of the conqueror angle,
yes.
Which is the Iron Throne was literally, this is a figure of submission.
Mm-hmm.
The swords that make up the Iron Throne are the swords that are handed over by the defeated enemies. And so the Iron Throne is being remade with his new defeated with E.U.R.O.N's defeated enemies, which are the gods.
Nice.
So that is what the symbolism here is, that this is him sitting on a throne of all of his vanquished foes, in the same way that Aegon the Conqueror did. It's just that his vanquished foes are the gods.
Yeah, and this built up from the burnt and blackened skulls, which would presumably be the people. So he's defeated the people, but those aren't the real defeat. That's not the real victory. This is the real victory. This is what's worth hanging on the Iron Throne. That's a great way to put it.
Absolutely. And as for the varied group, so he's got some priests of the Seven. He's got a priest of R'hllor. He's got Aeron. He's got the warlocks, or a couple of warlocks at least.
Yep.
My take is that what he's trying to do here, in this battle, and incidentally, I think he is trying to time this battle to happen at the same time as the battle over Enslavers Bay. So you're getting the Dragonbinder being blown and death and sacrifice happening at the same time on the other side of the world as this. I think he is trying to create this huge sacrifice of blood and chaos. He is trying to do everything at the same time. He is trying to summon Krakens. He's trying to control the dragon. He is trying to get as many people dead as possible. He is trying to make every single priest magic user that he could lay his hands on. They are going to be trying to do whatever they can. They're going to be calling on their gods. They're going to be casting their spells. They're going to be doing whatever they can, because he just wants to create immense chaos and destruction. It's not about winning a battle. It's about, how can I create the biggest bang happening in one go? And he's going to do everything at the same time.
Nice. That does add a bit to the idea that he's got some other means, like a glass candle, to see what's happening elsewhere. Otherwise, arranging such a thing would be, I don't know how else that would be possible, to know what's going on over there at the same time.
Well, the Dusky Woman would be my personal take.
Yes, they have some way to communicate, or that's a good call. Certainly, she is a big mystery. Like, what is her deal? I've sort of given up on guessing, because I haven't had any new thoughts on her in a while, but she remains a huge curiosity. Hissing at Makora
I can give you my 10-second take.
Do it. Let's do it.
He is walking into her, and that's why he gave her as the gift of Victarion, and therefore he is seeing through her eyes what is happening.
So that's why he chose her, because he knows he can do that. Yes.
He knows he can do that, and she can't speak or say anything. She can't write anything down.
Nice. Okay. All right. Yeah. I've seen variations on a theory like that, and I am definitely open to it. So we shall see. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about. We've got this section about breaking of brothers, but I think we pretty much covered everything in that section. Although I want to add one thing, a really good thought from Nina, sort of a summary, a high-level view on what's happening here with Aeron. She says that him taking refuge in his faith is she agrees that it's a really meaningful part of this chapter, and it's one of the core elements to the character side of all this, which is of course a core element to the story as a whole. And if you think back to where Aeron started, the very first chapter he's thinking how he has two pillars in his life, Balon and the Drowned God. And as we're introduced to him for the first time, Balon has just died. He's just gotten that news. And so here we have Euron trying to shatter that other pillar of his life. And Euron shattered the first one, because Euron killed Balon. But that Aeron is able to hold on to his faith so far, or as we've talked about, maybe he won't, but for now he has. Nina writes, this is particularly important because it shows that A Song of Ice and Fire isn't as nihilistic as some people maybe put it out to be. Some people look at scenes like this, Euron at the Shield Islands is another good example of gratuitous. Like, they just think this is just George just throwing a lot of extra violence at us. I do not agree with that. All this has a point to it. And it shows that the power of human belief, even if you don't you don't have to celebrate the fact that this guy is a zealot, but it just goes to show how powerful human belief is. No matter take away how good this person is, take away the scenarios, just he's suffering through an enormous amount of literally unimaginable pain. No one here could possibly understand the pain he's going through. Like, it's just kind of unbelievable. And him staying strong throughout that is, it's pretty, in a way, you can look at that as uplifting as far as what humans are capable of. Of course, it's also the opposite side of the evil that's people are capable of. But anyway, I think that's really interesting and worth a mention. And how that's going to bleed in with the rest of his brothers as well, or with his rest of his family, I'm very curious about. Okay, so let's talk about the devil and Phalia Flowers is what I've called this section. One thing that we associate with the devil in Western mythology, I suppose, is the deal with the devil concept, where the devil promises you something that you want, something he knows you want. Like the classic example is Robert Johnson. Another Robert coming up. Lots of Roberts today.
Fine name.
Yeah, it is. It's true. There's a reason that name gets used. Goes to made a deal with the devil to play guitar really well. And things like that. There's all sorts of stories like that in legend and myth. And they're all very similar in that the devil offers you something you really, really, really want, that you are... an offer you can't refuse, to use the mafia version of that. They make an offer you can't refuse. And this is what Phalia got. She received like this line, "My sons will come before them. He is sworn by your own drowned god." Like she's saying her kids with E.U.R.O.N will come before any other kids that he has with like Dany or whatever. Well, that's clearly a lie. We've been over how swearing means absolutely nothing to E.U.R.O.N. He doesn't even probably believe that God exists. But we also weren't surprised that poor Phalia was being misled here. But that's the thing. He gave her everything she wanted. He looked into her soul and was like, okay, this is a woman who's been rejected. She's been put down. She's been unloved. She's been mistreated badly. Perhaps the most heartbreaking victim of E.U.R.O.N. in this chapter, Nina writes, a teenage girl completely unprepared to deal with a sadistic monster on his quest for apocalyptic apotheosis. That's hard to say. Like literally, apocalyptic apotheosis.
Great phrase.
Yeah, good job, Nina. So, and this is very much, to me, this is a reminder of the love versus fear dichotomy that's always so present in discussions of power and leadership, like Tywin. Seminal example of love versus fear. Tywin is like, love is dead to me. I only rule through fear. Robb, opposite side. Robb, everybody loved Robb. They followed him. No one was, they weren't afraid of Robb, right? His followers. They weren't like, oh, we better do what he says or he's going to... No, they loved him. They're like, yeah, Robb, right? And so these are kind of polar opposites. Robert Baratheon himself, sort of, when he was younger, that's similar to Robb Stark. They followed him because they loved him. They thought he was great. Obviously, as a ruler, that didn't work out so well. Ned, for a certainty. The North rises to save the Ned's girl. Like, the guy's not even alive, and they're still holding his memory tight and honoring him. So it's just a reminder of how an abused person, and a person who's been abused, is even more susceptible, potentially, to abuse by someone who's particularly manipulated. Like Aeron, or rather, E.U.R.O.N. recognized the abuse that was heaped on Phalia and used that to commit more abuse and more misleading. And it's like Littlefinger, right? Littlefinger is the master of this. He goes around offering people the thing they want most. This is part of why he's the purveyor of brothels, and then he has dirt on you. And for E.U.R.O.N., he doesn't care about the dirt. He just cares about the ownership it gives over you directly. It's more like direct control. And this is what he's done to the Ironborn. They want loot. They want glory. That's what he offered at the Kingsmoot. And eventually, though, he's going to discard them probably to get what he wants. Is that how you would approach this on a high level? Or do you have some things to add to that? I would love to hear what you have to say about what Phalia Flowers represents to the larger story, or just whatever you want to say about this situation.
I mean, it's
a big one.
Horrible and tragic.
Yeah.
She
really, that's the first thing. That's always the first thing. Like, damn.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that we're supposed to see that. One thing which struck me, which I didn't have a chance to check, but I'm at the end of this chapter when she ends up being strapped next to the front of the ship next to Aeron. Euron says, "I have a gift for you,"
Yeah.
and I think that's the same phrase he uses when giving the Dusky Woman to Victarion.
Oh.
Which and I haven't followed that thought through yet, so I might just sort of leave that one hanging there. But certainly, if that's the case, and I think it is, then George R. R. Martin is deliberately wanting us to see a link between those two people, and certainly they both seem to have had their tongues cut out as well. So it's him giving giving a brother a woman, so to speak. So that is and he knows, incidentally, I do wonder whether when she came down and first saw Aeron thought she was incredibly beautiful. It was like the most beautiful, I can remember the exact phrase, but the most beautiful woman he'd seen, or something like that.
I have the quote. I've got the quote. I'll grab it for you.
Excellent.
Because we noticed that it's very similar to how Arya thinks of the Black Pearl, which is a chapter that will be very close to this one. So we know how George loves to use similar language in chapters that are near other chapters. So here's the line from the Black Pearl.
Yeah.
She was so lovely that the lamp seemed to burn brighter when she passed. And then the one for Phalia. You want to read this one, Shay?
Yes. In the lantern light, she was the loveliest thing Aeron had ever seen.
So we got the lamps and the lantern light thing. We've got the comment, the loveliest thing, or so lovely that the lamps seem to burn brighter. So yeah, pretty similar language. Not too close, but pretty close.
And so the link that I can certainly see there, Euron will know. He will know from Aeron's previous life, the first part of his life before he became austere. He was out all over the place. He will know what kind of woman Aeron was attracted to at that time. So I do not think it is a coincidence that he picked the Dusky Woman. Clearly, Victarion likes. And this woman that he gives as a gift to Aeron, clearly Aeron likes. And so I think that she wasn't chosen just because Euron fancied her. I think he was thinking ahead. Who is it that Aeron is going to start feeling
sympathy,
I don't know, proprietorial towards it's a sympathy, something like that, which he clearly is starting to, in a very small way, but it's clearly there. That then leads to the question, as I say, I haven't followed this thought process all the way through, but why does Euron want to do that? Why does he want at the other end, you can now protect her? I don't know. But I think it's deliberate that he picked somebody that Aeron found attractive.
Interesting. Yeah, that is very interesting. I wonder about that too. You're right to wonder about that, and I'm with you that I don't really have an answer that I would give and take and feel confident in, but it's very peculiar.
I do think that probably if Euron found a girl attractive, probably Aeron does too. For what it's worth. And also, I just want to say that the last name Flowers, her being a girl from the Reach, her name puts off this connotation, this image of sweetness, innocence, of naiveness, of innocence. Yeah.
You're totally right. And maybe a little guilt in Aeron's belief here, because he feels somewhat responsible for the fact that Euron is in charge, because he's the one who called for the Kingsmoot, although Euron was in charge already. Still, he gave him even more what's the word authority. Euron winning the Kingsmoot gave Euron even more authority than he had before that.
Absolutely. And just as a complete aside, can we just take a moment to accept the fact that out of all of the rulers that we've got in this story, he is, other than the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the closest thing we have to a democratically elected leader.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, democracy is sometimes not so great. It's just better than all the other things. Yeah. That's a good one. So I just want to also reiterate that psychedelics really are a big deal. Drugs, the connection between drugs and religion, I don't mean to be flippant, it's stronger than one might think. And I don't mean that drugs lead people to religion or the other way around. I just mean that there's a connection in terms of how dominating they can be, in terms of how big a part of someone's personality or big a part of their outlook it can be. For example, what is one of the number one things they teach you at a recovery program is to believe in a higher power. A lot of people who have had severe addiction issues in their life turn to faith or something along those lines. So there is a strong connection that I don't have the psychological expertise to speak to. I don't understand it all, but I know it's a thing on some level, and E.U.R.O.N does too. So there's something here to that. I have a question for you that you partly answered, so let's maybe kind of reiterate it here.
Excellent.
We were building up to this notion: did E.U.R.O.N fail to break Aeron? And I guess your answer was the jury's still out on that. We don't know yet. He may yet break him, and he may not actually be trying. He may have some. He may know he's not going to break him and use that for something. I don't know. So, did you have anything more you wanted to add to this? Since we've had lots of other conversations since that was first established, or should we move on?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would add to it is that I don't see in this chapter. Yes, it took place over a period of time, but it's not that every day E.U.R.O.N came down and was hammering away trying to break his faith, all the rest of it. It was just on a few occasional times that he came down to it. This wasn't a long and protracted attempt to break him. This was just the build-up to that point. That's how it feels to me. So, as I say, this isn't the end of the process. I genuinely do not know how this is going to end. George R. R. Martin could take it either way. But this was not. I don't think that E.U.R.O.N thought that leaving him down in a hold with a bit of water, making his feet puffy, and yes, it's not a nice image, but yeah, just that was not going to break him, and I think that he knew that.
Nice. Yeah, I like that take a lot. Returning to the comparison to Littlefinger briefly, we think about how we've done a lot of comparison of E.U.R.O.N to Ramsay and Joffrey. Littlefinger is another sort of precursor character who stands large on his own, or little on his own, but uses a lot of the same methods here. And we spoke about this creating of chaos to benefit. That is a huge corollary here. Littlefinger, big on causing confusion, flat out civil war. Like, he does things that lead to civil war, and that's what he wants. And now he's planning on profiteering off starvation, basically anything he can do to empower himself without scruples. And that sounds a lot like what E.U.R.O.N's doing, but E.U.R.O.N has tools that Littlefinger doesn't have. Littlefinger doesn't have an army. Littlefinger doesn't have magic. And Littlefinger isn't a warrior himself. He doesn't have like physical prowess like E.U.R.O.N has, at least some, although we don't actually know how much E.U.R.O.N has in this means. But he clearly knows how to fight, and Littlefinger doesn't. So he's just the culmination of villainhood in this series in so many ways. He's the end state of the worst type of character on a personal level, and the end state of the worst type of politician / leader. It's really impressive what George has piled into this character. But yeah, this whole chaos is a ladder thing. That is really what's going on here. Like Littlefinger unleashing civil war, very similar to what you said about him unleashing Krakens or unleashing the others, and then just providing the solution. Littlefinger's grain profiteering is the same thing. He's going to let people starve and then sell them grain at huge profits. But he's helping create the problem, or taking advantage of an existing problem. Like, he's not creating winter, but he is helping manipulate. He is manipulating the situation to make money from it and hurting people. So yeah, do you see other comparisons between Littlefinger and E.U.R.O.N, or maybe even other villains out there that maybe we should be throwing in the mix here that maybe I didn't bring up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the Littlefinger thing is that the chaos is a ladder thing, absolutely, but there is a very crucial difference between the two. Littlefinger, generally speaking, doesn't want it known that he's the one who created the chaos.
Yes.
He's there. He creates the chaos. He hides, and then he identifies a way that he can gain. And nobody thinks that it was him who did it. That's how he operates. E.U.R.O.N, the exact opposite. He wants everyone to know it was him. He wants any chaos that happens. He wants the credit for it. He wants people to be seeing him and thinking, this is a bringer of chaos. This is he is not just making the best of whatever's going out there. He is the protagonist who's bringing everything all the time. That is how he wants people to see him. So there's a big difference between those two, I would say.
Nice. Very good take. Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I'm glad you added that on. That's a good really helps round out the picture here. Moving on to a different topic. Couple of related questions here. Some of these things about the battle we've already covered, but a couple of loose ends here. One thing that's interesting to me is the comparison between the captured ships between Victarion and E.U.R.O.N. Now, it makes sense that they would both just have a bunch of merchant ships that they've captured along the way. Here's a pair of quotes. I'll read the... Actually, Shay, you want to read the first one, and then Robert can read the second one. The noble lady. The noble lady?
Okay, yeah. The noble lady was a tub of a ship, as fat and wallowing as the noble ladies of the green lands. With her would sail the other, lesser prizes that the Iron Fleet had taken on its long voyage to Slaver's Bay, a lubberly assortment of cogs, great cogs, carracks, and trading galleys salted here and there with fishing boats. Can I just say real quick, I cannot hear that first little section of the line without hearing George's voice. Because he read that chapter out loud. It's like, hear his big voice going, the noble lady was a tub of a ship.
And that's the first line of the chapter. Like, those are the actual first 3 sentences of that chapter, or 2 sentences, yeah. Okay, Robert, please read the second one.
Sure. Beyond them, a host of merchant ships floated on a tranquil turquoise sea. Cogs, carracks, fishing boats, even a great cog, a swollen sow of a ship as big as the Leviathan. Prizes of war, the damp hare knew.
So the similarity is to calling them prizes of war. There's this one particularly large ship that gets described, and you know what they're used for. So Joe Buckley had an idea that maybe part of E.U.R.O.N's plan here, it's not just Krakens. He's also got some plan to use merchant ships as bait, or as maybe they're just added onto his fleet. It might just be that simple. But Victarion's got a plan. He's doing the Trojan horse fleet thing, and Joe's suggestion is maybe E.U.R.O.N is doing something similar to that, to maybe make it look like a merchant fleet's under attack. To the Red Wine fleet comes in to try and help, and actually the merchant ships are filled with Ironborn. It's just an idea. I like it. It would we know that parallels happen more in A Song of Ice and Fire than most stories, so we're a little more keen to predict them. But anything to add to that, Robert, or is that just kind of a fun theory?
No, I mean, nothing particular there. I mean, I would just say we shouldn't try and overanalyze the strategic battle plan that E.U.R.O.N's got here. In my view, he is trying to create chaos. He is trying to create destruction. And so, yes, maybe he's done that. Maybe he will do. Maybe this is just what we had a few hints of earlier in the chapter as well. That he gets stuff to give to people to get them on his side. He's got the trappings of war, the prizes of war, and he can bestow them. But the other thing I would just sort of say, the timing. I already talked about I think that the timing here is to try and do this at the same time as the battle over on the far, over in Slaver's Bay. But it's also noticeable that they've been sat there for a little while waiting for the Red Wine fleet to come. He could, if he'd wanted to tactically win this battle, he could have decided, you know what, I can take on one of these fleets first. That's the logical thing strategically. That's the logical thing, because there are 2 fleets here. There's the Hightowers have got their fleet, and there's the Red Wines who've got their fleet. He's been hanging around just waiting.
Yeah, he's not trying to avoid this trap at all. He's letting them do it. Yeah,
exactly. So the strategically logical thing to do would be to try and take on one fleet first, and then take on the other one. That's
yeah, you're totally right.
Battle strategy 101. But he is not. He's holding back because he wants a bigger battle. So whenever we're trying to think about what tactics is he doing here, his aim is not to defeat the enemy. His aim is just to have a huge battle.
Nice idea. Yeah, that really fits with your idea of just as much death as possible at once. Because yeah, you're right. The strategy is very peculiar in that sense. It very much reminds me of some of the other battles that we're facing at the beginning here. Of the book. We have Yonkai's armies are trapped between Victarion and Barristan, who even compares it to Maekar Baelor, the hammer and the anvil. So it's a very direct reference to that sort of maneuver. And the Golden Company is going to face Mace Tyrell, and some of Mace's bannermen might turn and fight with the Golden Company, thus potentially trapping Mace's army between the two. And Stannis, similarly, is quite happy to sit and wait for this army from Winterfell to come right at him, even though he's outnumbered, and because, well, as I wrote here, Stannis will send his foes to the deep. Euron's going to send the deep to his foes, presumably through Kraken. So yeah, nice. And while
can I ask
go ahead.
You one question in this, because it's something, again, just rereading the chapter, something which stood out, and I genuinely don't know whether anyone's thought this through, whether it's just me reading too much into it. There's a certain phrase, the black water is mentioned, I think, 3 times in this. The water being described as black. Now, this is the kind of thing George R. R. Martin does when he talks about blood bruised skies. That's got a very clear reference there. Black water, I don't know whether anyone has symbolically thought about that. Obviously, I then think about the Battle of the Blackwater. Is this another thing he could be doing? Is this a hint we got from Wildfire coming in? I don't know.
That would be something.
That would be, if you're wanting extra bits of damage and carnage and all the rest of it, Wildfire would be something amazing there. So I don't know. It was just a random thought. Is George R. R. Martin trying to tell us something with that phrase?
A few other people actually took note of that, and one person brought up something that I thought I appreciated, was that the reference to the Iliad, how Homer liked to describe the wine dark sea as a important line that gets cited a lot. And George, in Victarian's chapters, very keen on describing the sea, what state it's in, which it makes sense for Victarian's POV. Being a sailor, he would be constantly aware of such things. But as usual, it doesn't have to mean only one thing. George is amazing with sentences, speaking to multiple things at once, or multiple plots, or multiple ideas. So yeah, I like considering that. That's a kind of theory that's worth considering. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and when I was going off on my own little mental flight of fancy, this is, we can call this tinfoil if you want. I think most people think that there's a fair chance that the library is going to burn.
Yeah.
In Old Town. Might that be also a wildfire thing? I don't know. It's just or alternative option, maybe a dragon. Yeah. If Euron's got a dragon,
burns down the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yikes. Yeah, that is, and that brings us back to something we touched on at the beginning. Yes, he might want things in the High Tower. He might want things in the Citadel. He might want some things in them and then to destroy them afterwards. He may want some other combination of things. And this, again, reminds us of Night King. Night King wanted to destroy Bran because Bran said his knowledge was what Night King wanted to destroy. He wanted to get rid of human knowledge because that's the biggest way to set back humanity, is to get rid of all the accumulated knowledge that civilization is based on, right? If Euron can destroy all that knowledge, it really enables him to rule over a weakened world. He wants to make humanity weak so he can rule it. Well, destroying the accumulated knowledge is an incredibly potent and dark way of doing that. And talk about casting humanity into a metaphorical darkness. The darkness of ignorance is something I'm sure George would see it as that, as the Dark Ages, right? Like that's a similar concept, because one of the things about the Dark Ages, the reason we call it that is because there's no records. It was a really bad time, and the reason the lack of records is a extension of that, because the times were so bad, people didn't have time to write things down. They were too busy surviving. So that's the world Euron wants. Euron wants a desperate world that's easier to rule, and taking out the greatest parts of humanity is part of that.
By the way, we're talking about Old Town being burned. I would be remiss if I did not, of course, mention the other city in A Song of Ice and Fire that was a city of scholars that has been burned, which is Salash, part of the Sarnori. That's
a good point. Another the room. What was it? The Palace of 1,000 Rooms, I think it was called, or something like that.
Anyways, but they were destroyed. I don't think it was called a palace of anything. I have it open right here. It's just the City of Scholars.
Okay.
So I'm
I'm
not
thinking
sure.
I'm conflating with something else perhaps. Anyway, but yes, the point stands. You're right. Yeah, and that's a similar example of that, because what the Sarnori were a pretty big, powerful civilization, and like almost everything they know was destroyed forever. There's like almost no Sarnite culture anywhere. But if some of these books had survived, well, quite a lot could have survived with them. And with the Werewood Network as a stand-in for human knowledge, or as a repository for human memory, is a really powerful concept. So I wonder how E.U.R.O.N relates to that. Okay, so let's return to one of the visions for a quick question along those. So a couple of people pointed out that in one of the visions there's the blackened skulls, but there's also a forest burning behind E.U.R.O.N. And a few people interpreted that as E.U.R.O.N being an enemy to the old gods, or an enemy to the children of the forest. Do you see it that way? And before you answer, let me add another wrinkle into the question. I know I love to do that. I love to ask a question and then stop you from answering so I can make the question more to make it even longer. But the point is E.U.R.O.N aware that he's a rejected green seer? Let's say that let's accept that theory just for argument's sake. Maybe you do or don't already. But let's say he's a failed green seer. They checked him out. Bloodravens found him and decided, no, actually, this guy's too dark. We're not going to use him after all. What if he's aware of that? And going back to the daddy issues stuff, like what if he's mad that they didn't think he was good enough, so he's going to destroy them all? Or like maybe I wouldn't say that's his full motivation, but there's like an element of being rejected. Is that taking it too far, or is there? You think maybe there's something there?
I think there's definitely something there. We probably don't have time to go into all of the background to why that might be the case, but if you just think of Bran's journey as a sort of, this seems to be how it goes, is that Bloodraven kind of makes contact, doesn't really seem to know necessarily who he is, because when he then sent Jojen and Mira to go off and find him, it was just like this is his avatar.
Yeah,
he didn't say go find Bran Stark. He said you're looking for the wolf with the wings held down by chains. That was the avatar. So probably he doesn't know exactly who that is, and this also as a hint to the starting point for Bran is you have this dream and you have this. Do you fly? If you do fly, therefore that seems to be a starting point for your magic. You're awakening the idea of magic within you, but it doesn't get fully unleashed until you get the weirwood paste. That's the point where his mind is completely open to this, and he can become the Green Seer and use the Green Seer talents more broadly. He has some that he probably, like all of the Starks, had some things just inherently. Then he had a little bit of a boost with the dream. Then there was the full unleashing. So map that across to E.U.R.O.N. If we say he's got some natural gifts anyway, which sounds about sensible, then he had the dream, so he's had this opening up to actually be more magical in some way. But if after that then Bloodraven goes, oh, actually, you know what, no, or maybe it's just because he happened to be on the Iron Islands or went off over to Essos and they lost contact, because the Weirwood Network does seem to have a kind of a range in some way, but for whatever reason that stopped. What you've got is this person with an awakened magical powers needing something to tip him over, the equivalent of the Weirwood paste, and that's going to be the thing which gives him the real powers, the real Green Seer powers. E.U.R.O.N then gets the Shade of the Evening. That is the thing which completes his journey. So he was on the Green Seer path, but then it gets turned, rather than fulfilling the Green Seer path of becoming magical Green Seer, he gets the dark, twisted anti-version of it, being the Shade of the Evening, and that is what opens up his power. So that's my general take on what's going there.
I like it. All right, I think we have one final main question before we get to the audience questions, and that final question is actually related to something someone asked us here, and it's where where do we think he goes after Old Town? This is actually a question from Eric Fork. I'm going to actually combine this with another question we have. Do you think that maybe King's Landing is next, or do you think there might be something else in between? And also, it's just like hard to consider like how young Griff fits into all this. If his team takes King's Landing and advances Cersei, is Euron going to come to King's Landing and fight him, or is he going to bring Cersei with him? Is that how Cersei's going to get back to King's Landing? I see a couple of different possibilities, but I'm curious what you think.
Okay, there are a lot of moving parts here.
There really are.
So,
yes, it's difficult.
It is. So very roughly, very high level, the most logical path that I see through for this is where we leave it. Cersei's in control of King's Landing.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to, Varys has basically he's got rid of Kevin. She's going to do a knee-jerk reaction because that's what she does. Yeah. It's going to be whether it's blowing up the Great Sept as we had on the show, or it's going to be something like that. She's got enemies with against the Faith and against the Tyrells, who she's going to blame for murdering Kevin. So she is going to do that. She's then going to be in sole command of a city which has been having some kind of atrocity in it. Mm-hmm. I see her very much as this Rhaenyra kind of feel of being in charge of a city where the people are turning against her. Yeah. She is not going to be a good ruler. At the same time at which we get the Fagon arriving. Now, Fagon, I think, is going to take King's Landing, because I think that what we're told again and again, there aren't actually many Lannister soldiers in King's Landing at the moment.
Dany's vision seems to suggest the Class Dragon on poles like he'll have some sort of success,
Exactly. And so I think she will get out in some way. Fagon will come in and will be a good king for a while. He will probably do the good things. And this is George R. R. Martin saying, he may or may not be who he says he is. Does that matter if he's actually ruling wisely? Yeah. So for a short period of time, I suspect that. Where does Cersei go? The only place she can go is Casterly Rock from that point. So she has to go back to Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock is actually not all that far from Old Town. And she will be looking for who does she get as an ally. She will think that she is the rightful ruler. Who does she get as an ally? Who is left?
E.U.R.O.N.
She can't ally with the Starks. She can't. She won't be allying with Dawn. It's E.U.R.O.N. E.U.R.O.N. by this point will realize he's not going to get Daenerys, and he wants somebody to rule with him. So that makes sense.
Yes.
So then we've got them somehow getting together. At which point we've got Dany is going to be arriving towards trying to get King's Landing, and probably the others arriving. And this is where I see the Winds of Winter roughly ending. It's Ice and Fire in the Song of Ice and Fire finally breaching Westeros. That's where I see that. Bringing this all back around to E.U.R.O.N.
I'm with you.
Where does he go next? Inland. Absolutely. He will be very happy with the fact that Dany and Fagon, and I think all the hints are that Dany will show that Fagon isn't who he claims to be and all the rest of it. Yeah. He'll be very happy for them to be fighting each other. Where do they go? They push inland, and I think that, again, the imagery, symbolism, hints that we've got, Harrenhal seems to be a perfect place for him to set up his base with Cersei. Which brings me back to those trees. What if he does have a grudge against the Children of the Forest, and he has got a dragon? Is he going to try and burn down the Isle of Faces?
Or at least just the werewood, and he might. Wow, yeah.
It sounds crazy, but it's the logical thing for him to do.
Is.
If these assumptions that we've made are correct, it is the logical thing for him to do. And so I think while he's doing that, we've got the others are going to be encroaching from the north. Dany is going to be will have sorted out the Fagon situation, and then she turns her attention to what's happening in the north. And so the question is, does E.U.R.O.N. then go into King's Landing because it's now pretty much empty?
Yeah.
That, I think, for me is the thing. But I think Harrenhal symbolically, that works really well for me as being like where they capture next.
If King's Landing suffers some sort of destruction too, that would really fit in well with the Euron ruling over blackened skulls and all that. Like, this is what's left of it. I like that a lot. Your thoughts are pretty similar to mine in a lot of ways, especially because we're keeping it on a high level. We're not trying to get too deep in the details. So only one thing I would add to that is it also fits in with something else the show gave us, which is Daenerys' armies on the East Coast fighting with Lannister forces on the West Coast, like kind of meeting in the middle. Remember all that stuff about Tyrion being outmaneuvered by Jaime? Well, that was all happening while Cersei was allied to Euron. It's just that they still had King's Landing at the time. That's not really that big of a difference if they don't have King's Landing, or even if they do, you still have the same scenario where Daenerys has Dragonstone and maybe Dorne if that's progressed far enough, or who knows what Dorne is doing. The Stormlands maybe. And then you got, like you said, Harrenhal in the middle. Harrenhal's just in the middle of everything. I mean, it's the middle of the continent. It's the middle of the story, the Isle of Faces. So yeah, I'm with you, because it also brings us back to that what we talked about at the beginning, where Euron is very much a parallel to Aemond One Eye, and that is where he died, over the God's Eye. And you've got mystery there with illusory dragons and Alice Rivers and stuff happening afterwards that's unresolved in Fire and Blood, and maybe some of that wraps in somehow. I don't know, but I got it.
And just in the chat, Harry Krishnan saying Harrenhal is a symbol of Ironborn history and dominance. Let's not forget that. This was Ironborn who Harren the Black was the person who built it, and it was hubris.
Great point.
That was what this was about. This was the person who had such a massive ego, and who's got the massive ego?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, he's certainly tops in that department. That is great. Yeah, so I think we've connected a lot of dots here today. Here's a couple of small dots to connect. We know that one priest is the warlock, rather, is Primo, certainly. He's swinging on his chains, kind of like Theon is. Of course, Theon and Aeron both in chains at the start of their chapter. Greyjoy's being in torment comes kind of often, I suppose. Another interesting note from Nina as well, just to add on to the whole Quellon stuff, and maybe to add a little extra piece of Aeron's personality, make sure we keep sight of, is that Nina points out that Theon's brothers would have been of an age with Aeron, but there's no indication he was ever friends with them. But he liked Asha. He thinks Asha is the one who's most like their father, and most like Kellon, which we've noted before. Yeah, Kellon was somewhat progressive, and Asha's kind of, obviously, as far as Ironborn goes, she's pretty progressive. She wanted to, make friends with traditional enemies and build and trade instead of fight. So yeah, and Kellon was
queen.
Yeah, and Kellon was doing some of those same things. So that's kind of unusual, and a worthy note. E.Stone sends a super chat. Looks like from England, and says bravo. Thank you very much, E.Stone. Harris from Canada says, Euron is one of my favorite characters in the series, and what the show did to him was beyond a disappointment. It was a crime against art. Well, I can't disagree with that, but I will say the silver lining is that the show didn't spoil much of what's coming for Euron at all. I do appreciate that we have very little idea what's happening. We have details, we have guesses, we have fun theories, but in terms of real answers, Robert, we don't know what's coming, do we?
I mean, we can. I did a video a while ago just trying to plot out the Winds of Winter in terms of how big it was going to be, and it was very obvious that when you can start plotting out the first few chapters. Actually, we can be reasonably certain about in most people's plot lines, and there are a lot of different plot lines. So probably for half a book, we can be reasonably certain about what's going to happen. Beyond that, it starts to get really quite murky, it has to be said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Guinevere Greenstone says, I think Euron just doesn't care what's real, only what he can use for his advantage. Yeah, that's a fine way to put it. Yeah, and again, as Robert said, it almost doesn't matter what the truth is, because it does amount to this, whatever's behind it. So I think this is a good way to distill the issue. Well said, Guinevere. Nina says, some scholars have suggested that the Dragon Lords regarded all faiths as equally false, believing themselves to be more powerful than any god or goddess. They looked upon priests and temples as relics of a more primitive time, though useful for placating slaves, savages, and the poor, with promises of a better life to come. Well, we've talked about how E.U.R.O.N is trying to. A lot of the trappings of power he's gathered are those of Valyria: the armor, the horn, the dragons, the coloring. Even he's even got black and red coloring for his flag. So he is sort of trying to have. He does seemingly have a similar attitude. That's a pretty good take. That he's looking on all the gods as fake, kind of like the way the Valyrians do. Do you have anything to add to this whole concept of E.U.R.O.N and Valyria and trying to like kind of rejuvenate what they were doing and use some of their same ruling techniques and all that?
No. Well, only in as much as getting a dragon is only half of the issue.
Ooh.
We had this in Dany's last chapter, is that she's there when Drogon's flown her off to somewhere she did not want to go, and she's pondering, I vaguely remember the Valyrians, they had horns that could control dragons. So, which is, and magically there's a horn suddenly coming towards Slaver's Bay, so she will probably end up getting that. How does E.U.R.O.N control a dragon once it arrives? Is it all in once it's been blown because he's got a magical bond with that horn now, that once it is blown and it's been captured, that's then his dragon? That's the bit that is still very vague. Or is he just going to have a wild dragon that flies around?
That would be something.
I don't know. It's getting the dragon is that's the easy bit.
Yeah.
It's what you do with it once you've got it. I mean, Dany can't control her dragon, so where's E.U.R.O.N going to get the ability to do that from? But what the trappings that he has been returning with or starting to present have been Valyrian ones, so he's definitely trying to echo it, but that's as much because he's got the Valyrian steel armor, he had a dragon egg allegedly, we'd be thinking about the glass candles and all the rest of it. He is definitely using that, but I personally don't think he's trying to mimic them. He's just using the best thing that he can find, the thing which is the most effective, the thing which is the most impressive. Everyone thinks that all the Valyrian stuff has gone and disappeared. Oh no, it hasn't. I've got a whole suit of armor. This is the way that he's playing the game. If there was something that was hugely impressive from somewhere else, then I think he would use that. And actually, complete aside, when you go back through book one, as I have been doing, the link between the Dothraki and what he's doing here is very strong. They swept all across what is now the Dothraki Sea, and then you get the road that heads into Vaes Dothrak. It's lined by all of the dead gods, the gods of the people that they've conquered.
Good, yes.
And that is the symbolism is very much there. He is setting himself up as all of the symbols of, or whether he's deliberately doing it or George R. R. Martin is wanting us to see it, the symbols of conquerors. The Iron Throne is there, the symbol of Aegon the Conqueror. He's got this link across to the Dothraki like that. The Valyrians, he's there. He is getting this image of being the conqueror.
I don't want to draw it too much to Daenerys here, but there's that connection as well, of course, and that E.U.R.O.N wants to marry Daenerys, and Daenerys does marry a Dothraki and kind of seems to like a bad boy.
That's a good point, yeah. And of course we return back to the very recent example of the Sarnori, who were the ones were destroyed by the Dothraki. So that's, this is very true. Like and they're like the Dothrakis.
Ooh, that's a really good point, actually, when you bring that up.
What's that?
That's a really good point, bringing up the comparison between the Dothraki, destroying Salash, and then E.U.R.O.N destroying Old Town. And
they are, like, from a religious perspective, they believe like tilling the earth is evil. So like they're like talk about trying to talk about beliefs that reset like humanity to an earlier time. They don't believe in writing, reading, farming. Like, geez. You can't, what do we have without those things? I mean, geez.
And they came up out of the water from the womb of the world.
That's right.
I mean, there's
on the first horse.
Exactly. The deeper you go into it, there are lots. They seem completely different, and they may well not meet in any way, shape, or form. But there are links.
That's actually a really good link. You said like they emerging from the sea on a horse. Sure. Like, never thought of that one. That's really
on
good.
The Dothraki Sea. It's just like again.
George is so good at this.
We've got another good point here from Nina
Okay.
that I wanted to bring up. We were talking a lot about what Aeron's next chapter would be because George did say that Aeron would have another chapter. Who knows? I don't know if anyone thinks it'll be more than one chapter. I think it'll be just one, I hope. And I brought up what we've talked about before, which is the idea that Aeron's chapter will just be him on the prow of the ship with like a front row view of the battle, and then he dies. But Nina brings up something. She says Aeron may even believe that the appearance of Krakens is the will of the drowned god defying E.U.R.O.N, rather than believing E.U.R.O.N summoned them, and then he's killed right after.
Yeah, he dies thinking the Krakens are coming for... Yeah, that's possible, yeah. I like it.
Just on the chapters thing, it's worth just sort of taking a step back and looking at sort of the art of writing. What George R. R. Martin does with the POV chapters is he wants to tell the story, and he introduces characters as POV characters when we need to see bits of the story that we otherwise wouldn't. So, for example, we get John Connington appears as a POV character once Tyrion's gone away, because he still wants us to see what's happening with Vagon, but Tyrion is no longer there to show it to us. When you get Melisandre magically appeared as a POV character, why is she magically appeared as a POV character? Because at the Wall, Sam's gone away, and Jon is about to die. So whose eyes are we going to see what happens at the Wall through? It's Melisandre. So, and you can pick up the same thing. Areo Hota, Sir Barristan, always Dany's gone away. How do we know what's going on in Meereen? That's because we've introduced Sir Barristan as a POV chap. Taking that across to where Aeron is who we are seeing what E.U.R.O.N's doing through his eyes. If we take George R. R. Martin at his word that, and I think we probably can this time, that he's not planning on introducing any new main POV characters, that means that this whole bit of E.U.R.O.N's story, we've got three possible people. We've got Cersei probably at the end of it. We will see that. We'll probably have Sam will be able to see an attack or something on Old Town.
100% agree.
Anything else that we find out about E.U.R.O.N is going to be through Aeron. So this battle, yes, definitely. But if we want to see any other thought process, any other bit of plot to do with him, Aeron has to be the person there, and that means we have to have another chapter from him. So it really depends on how much George R. R. Martin wants us to see what's going on with him.
And from a writing, that's a really good point. And from a writing perspective, that may explain why this chapter is so front-loaded with information, because if he's only planning on having 2 or 3 chapters with Aeron, you got to just do it all now before it becomes Sam, who has far less insight onto this character. Sam's going to be on the outside looking in, whereas Aeron has, like you said, a front prow seat.
And we do not want Sam anywhere near this, more importantly.
Exactly, and probably the Sam chapter is going to be the city's all in flames and him running away trying to grab a few books and find Gilly and get out of there. That is going to be what his chapter's about. It's just E.U.R.O.N, it's just the impact of E.U.R.O.N rather than actually seeing E.U.R.O.N do a thing.
Yes, well said. Very minor note here. Nina points out that in that scene, there's that guy, I think it's the Red Oarsman, making oinking sounds. And Nina suggests this might be the Isle of Pigs, which is where they're at. Or rather, they are at the Isle of Pigs, but her guess is that they are ruled by House Pharaoh, because Pharaoh means a litter of pigs. And House Pharaoh is a vassal to the Red Wine, so this is in the general area where they would exist. So, small note, but that's cool. I would agree with that guess.
Can I share my pun?
Guess of my own.
George says Dothraki instead of Dothraki.
He does.
So, Dothrak Ironborn.
Amazing. I just read that in the chat, so that was wonderful.
Yeah.
Love it.
He's also said Stannis and Tommen. So, whatever. But he's also said Tommen and Stannis. Like, he even changed. That's probably why he's like, say however you want, because I do. Here's a nice comedic observation from Rolling Knight from our Flick channel. Bloodraven looked inside E.U.R.O.N and said, actually, nah, not you. And after E.U.R.O.N touched his brother who had grayscale, it could have infected him, but grayscale itself actually said, nah, actually not you. Even grayscale doesn't want anything to do with E.U.R.O.N. Nice. Okay. it feels like we could go another 3 hours talking about this chapter, but at some point we have to stop. So we'll call it now. Thanks everyone for coming to join us today for this awesome discussion. I hope we have added a whole host of new ideas for y'all on E.U.R.O.N. and going forward, and Aeron and Phalia and Krakens and Dany and all this stuff. It's really neat to see how these plot lines are coming together. That's one of the particular fun things I see about this chapter that we hadn't considered quite as much. Given reacting to it right away, it's harder to wrap it all together into everything, and without the TV show.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool, too, to compare how we covered it before, how you can cover something so differently in just the same chapter.
Yeah. What about you, Robert? Isn't it kind of any comments on how the iteration and evolution of viewing this chapter is kind of an interesting thing, huh? Like a microcosm of how this fandom works.
It is. It's. I think everybody's reaction first, and whenever you come to it, is just to be blown away by it. Though I think that's the thing. It's only when you start uncovering the levels inside it. It's out of all the pre-release chapters, it's the one I think that you can get more for each level you go down into it, and hints about where the story is going in the future as much as anything else. So yeah, it has moved as we've got, particularly as we started off on this, as we've had the TV show and as we've had Fire and Blood. It's allowed us to get a little bit more of an idea about where George's mind is on us.
Nice. Very well said. Well, and thank you very much, Robert, for coming on. This was a fantastic discussion. Thanks for helping us read the quotes. Your thoughts were amazing. You added a lot of things I never thought about. I imagine that's the same for a lot of listeners today. We gave them a lot of things that they had never considered before, or perhaps expanded on things they had. So I think we've done a good job today, if I say so myself.
Well, thank you again for having me on. As I say, I count the two of you as being the creme de la creme of this community. So it's always a pleasure.
Well, we will, I'm sure, collaborate again at some point in the not too distant future, and we'll make sure everyone knows about that when it's going to happen. Please join us on our Facebook group, our Discord, our Slack, our all our social media. Really great ways to communicate with us. You can send us questions. You can interact with us in other ways. And I believe we are absolutely going to ask you again to submit your voices for our Winds of Winter audio project.
Yes, currently we are so close to having everyone for Tyrion 2. We essentially do, but I would like another shot at Brown Ben. So if you have a good take on Brown Ben Plum, now is the time to submit your voice. I have a backup, but you know.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Brown Ben Plum.
Oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I hear. Now, the problem,
what you had in mind.
The problem for me is that I don't actually know what voice I picture for Brown Ben. I don't have.
I can only hear Roy Dotrice's version, which is fine. Like some of Dotrice's voices are off, but that one works for me.
Yeah, I don't know what vibe I get.
Yeah. It's hard to describe. Like older, kind of soft spoken, but
he's amiable sometimes.
Amiable, but dishonest. Like you get that sense that he's lying, but he's.
But like, is it a big voice, like a booming voice? I don't know.
I don't think so. I think he has more of a. Softer...
Well, the voice you said you liked best was more of a booming voice.
Well, yeah, but I liked it. But yeah. I mean.
So yeah, this is interesting. So yes, please submit your voice.
Anyway, yeah. So we mentioned a few different previous episodes we did here. The Forsaken episode, our original coverage of this chapter, we go deeper into talk about his brothers, more on the Valyrian steel, other ancient artifacts, other theories in regards to things that might be there. We talk more about Shade of the Evening, more Dany and Aeron comparisons. In our actual Euron Greyjoy episode, we talk a lot more historical parallels. The characters like the Grey King, the Bloodstone Emperor, and the Red Kraken, who we didn't hardly mention any of those today, but there's a very rich comparisons there. We talk about why he wears an eye patch. There's a lot more on Kellon Greyjoy, some history of him. There's also an early version of Euron and the Horn of Winter theory from Emmett Booth, which is in that episode. Actual Emmett is in there. Tactics that Euron might use. There's some additional things we bring up there. So a lot of expansion on that. Also, I recommend checking out the Ashai Great Empire of the Dawn stream that I did with you, Robert. That was on your channel. That was good times. There's some.
It was a while ago now, but it was excellent.
It was fun.
You brought the fire.
Yeah, and I think some of it's definitely relevant to this. Mostly it stands on its own, but there's some definite connections. Also, people in the chat brought up the connection to our Werewood episodes. That's a good call out. Yeah, our Werewood episodes have some strong relevance here.
Yeah, considering all the Shade of the Evening talk.
Yeah, for sure. So next time we finish off the Winds of Winter. There's only one chapter we haven't done yet. It was actually planned for a while back, but we had to reschedule it. That is Theon 1 with Jason Concepcion. So that should be great. What do you have coming up next? We talked about what you've been doing recently, but what do you have coming up, Robert? Anything you want to shout out that maybe we didn't mention or you want to re-shout out?
I think I'll just re-shout out what I said before.
Cool.
If you're interested in Lord of the Rings as well as A Song of Ice and Fire, then do check out my channel. I'll be covering that. Also, probably The Witcher. And I'm considering a few other things, like The Wheel of Time. I still haven't decided. I'm waiting for the trailer on The Wheel of Time before deciding on that. But if you are interested in classic science fiction and fantasy stories, you like audiobooks, then do check out my second channel, which is called The Well Told Tale.
Yes, please do.
Lovely to see you over there.
Yeah, do it. Check out InDeepGeek. Check out The Well Told Tale. And let him know about some of these other fandoms that he's on the fence with. I mean, if you want to see him cover Wheel of Time, you should let him know. I have read The Wheel of Time myself. I'm looking forward to the show. I have no plans on covering it, but I'm very excited to watch it. And, of course, we're covering The Witcher on our own podcast called The Podcaster's Surprise. So maybe one day we'll do a collaboration, a Witcher collaboration there, Robert. That'd be fun.
That would be fun, yeah.
So everyone in the chat, and if you're listening afterwards, say hi to my mother. She was our studio audience today, visiting. She's right over there. Woohoo, yeah.
Yay!
She is. So thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks to Ashea for managing so much at once, running production like a kraken with many arms over there. Don't forget about historyofwesteros.threadless.com. We got these shirt designs here. We got the Werewood shirt, and we got the regular black, red, and white History of Westeros logo shirt. Thank you to our History of Westeros mods for managing things over on Facebook. Great job done over there. Our Facebook group is very active. Our Flick and Slack and Discord channels have some things going on as well. Our Discord channel has really been getting more and more active, partly because there's so many other topics hosted there. Flick is very focused on the chapters only. So
yeah, Discord.
I'm sorry?
I was just going to say that Discord is a really good place to join if you want to talk about House of the Dragon and any other spin-offs, because I've been posting spoilery stuff, because there's a lot of filming stuff that I don't want to post on Facebook all the time. People don't want to see it, but I want to talk about it. So if you want to see all sorts of behind-the-scenes filming stuff, then
the different platforms provide different ways to engage with the material and with each other, so we use them all. So pick the one that you like best, or multiples, and we'll see you there. Thanks also to Michael Klarfeld, a.k.a. Claridox.de, for the maps behind you and for the video intro. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod for the Valar Rereadis music. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the regular History of Westeros intro-outro. Thanks to our Bengineer for the sound quality assistance and engineering, as the name indicates. Thank you very much to our patrons for keeping the lights on, keeping all the show functioning. The financial support is, well, we couldn't live without it. Let's put it that way. And, of course, we, as usual, like to shout out our friends over on Here Be Dragons today. They are talking about the classic movie, The Never-Ending Story. And if you're a fan of that one, well, they just started maybe a minute ago. So if you're catching the replay of our show, then you can go catch the replay of theirs. If you're catching this live, why not head over there right now and have a good time with them. Thanks to everyone for being here live. Thanks to Robert again. And we'll see you all next time for more Valar Rereadis.
Bye.
Thanks, Robert. That was awesome.